105.5 FM, our viewers on the Parliament channel, and those of you joining us via the World Wide Web on the Parliament's website, www.ttparliament.org. We are just a few moments away from the start of today's sitting of the House of Representatives. Don't forget that you can follow our proceedings via our YouTube channel, ParlView. You can comment on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ttparliament, or via Twitter, @ttparliament. We take you over now to the chamber for the start of the proceedings.
The Honourable Speaker.
We welcome you to the 21st sitting of the House in the first session of the 11th Parliament that takes place on Friday, April 15th, 2016.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the Creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this House here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen, Amen, Namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, I have received communication from the following members. Dr. Tim Gopi-Singh, MP, Member for Caroni East. Mr. Ganga Singh, MP, Member for Chaguanas West. And Mr. Colum Embert, MP, Member for Digo Martin North East, have requested leave of absence from today's sitting of the House. The leave which the members seek is granted.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay on the table the following papers. 1, the audited financial statements of Evolving Technologies and Enterprise Development Company Limited for the year ended September 30th, 2010. 2, the audited financial statements of the Youth Training and Employment Partnership Program Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2014. 3, the audited financial statements of Taurus Services Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2014. 4, the Customs Amendment to the First Schedule Order 2016. 5, the Motor Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Number 2 Order. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that papers 1, 3, and 4 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers number 1, 3, and 4 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. The Minister of State in the Office of the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay on the table the following paper: the delegation report of the Parl-America's meeting on gender-based political harassment, building awareness in Parliament, Castries, St. Lucia, January 26 to 27, 2016.
From committees, Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
Leader of the Opposition.
To the Honourable Minister of National Security, could the Minister indicate measures being put in place for citizens who require passports for emergency or immediate travel, given the report of a backlog of over 20,000 passport applications at Immigration Division.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, an efficient and robust system is currently in place to meaningfully address any requests for expedited applications which carry a specific fee for any requisite emergencies concerning business, medical, or health-related, or even the death of a family. In addition, passports are being actively processed at all relevant offices and sub-offices: Chaguanas, San Grande, Port of Spain, Point Fortin, San Fernando, and Tobago. The waiting period for new applications is approximately 6 weeks, while renewal applications take approximately 3 weeks. Currently, Madam Speaker, from 2007, with the inception of the machine-readable passports to present, there are several thousand passports that have not been collected. In fact, some of them have also expired, Madam Speaker.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the Honourable Minister tell us whether there are plans in place, or if it is already policy, to give free passports to persons over 65?
I will not allow that as a supplemental question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Would the Honourable Minister indicate whether a part of the robust process that the Ministry is going through caters for work permits?
Minister of National Security.
Madam Speaker, there is a process with respect to work permits that's equally as robust.
Questions on notice. Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance.
Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Madam. Madam, I seek your leave under Standing Order 17 to move the adjournment of the House for the purpose of discussing a definite matter of urgent public importance, namely the failure of the Ministry of National Security to address the safety and security of state witnesses who have put their lives at risk to give evidence in most important criminal prosecutions in our country. The matter is definite because it pertains to specific state witnesses who have been identified by the Director of Public Prosecutions as persons to whom the state should provide protection under the Justice Protection Act, but who are not being provided with such protection. The matter is urgent because the concerns of these persons and the risk to their lives have been brought to the attention of the Minister of National Security, the Commissioner of Police, and the Director of Public Prosecutions, and no action has been taken to date. The matter is of public importance because the proper administration of the criminal justice system depends on the evidence of witnesses, and the unprecedented increase in homicides, coupled with the decrease in detection rates, makes the evidence of state witnesses more essential than ever before in the fight against crime. The matter is of public importance because the failure of the state to provide protection to these witnesses will lead to undermining of the criminal justice system, as more than 10 persons charged with murder would walk free if the evidence of these state witnesses were lost. The matter is of public importance also because the damage to the criminal justice system that will result from the failure of the state in providing protection to these state witnesses will be irreparable and could have the effect of discouraging persons who have information regarding crime and those in the commission of crime from providing that evidence to the authorities, which could lead to an increase in crime and a breakdown of law and order. Madam, I seek your leave under the Standing Order 17.
Honourable members, I am not satisfied that this matter qualifies under Standing Order 17. I advise that the member pursue this matter under Standing Order 16.
Statements by ministers.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am pleased, Madam Speaker, having been authorized by Cabinet to make the following statement. Madam Speaker, upon coming into office in September 2015, I gave a commitment as the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to produce and publish by the end of the first quarter of 2016 a legislative agenda so that the Parliament as a whole, interest groups and general population at large could have direct insight into matters of legislative priority for this government. This commitment was and still is seen by this government as not only respectful, but more importantly, as an exercise of plain common sense, as the publication of a legislative agenda encourages and facilitates democratic perspective, measure, and participation in the consideration and making of laws for the peace, order, and good governance of our beautiful country. In September to November 2015, Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago had already suffered more than 5 years of the UNC's government's willful and persistent failure to state its legislative priorities by the publication of a legislative agenda, despite calls for the same. It was established that the anticipated actual legislative business of the 10th Republican Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago was a carefully guarded secret of the UNC government, which resulted in an haphazard and chaotic approach to the whole government and whole of country developmental needs of our citizens. The Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago in November 2015 assumed the chairmanship of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, otherwise known as CFATF, which is an intergovernmental body comprising of 27 nations in the Caribbean Basin and Latin America, and which is mandated to set up standards and to promote effective implementation of legal, regulatory, and operational measures for combating money laundering, terrorist financing, and the financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and other related threats to the integrity of the financial system. In November 2015, the fourth round mutual evaluation report of Trinidad and Tobago conducted by CFATF was produced for consideration. In that month, the Money Laundering and Criminal Terrorist Financing National Risk Assessment for the period 2011 to 2013, using the World Bank assessment tool associated with Recommendation 1 of FATF recommendations, was significantly delayed. Accordingly, the time frame selected for the production of the government's legislative agenda by end of first quarter 2016 was specifically geared to facilitate, amongst other things, firstly, the new government's necessary review and approval of matters of policy with respect to primary and secondary legislation. Secondly, consideration of operationalization issues related to legislative priorities. Thirdly, the completion of the work of the National AML CFTF Committee, that's referred to as NAMLAC, tasked with reviewing the fourth round mutual evaluation report produced by CFATF, and with recommending legislative and efficiency prescriptions to address observed shortcomings in the FATF recommendation. Fourthly, the completion of the Money Laundering and Criminal Terrorist Financing National Risk Assessment for Trinidad and Tobago for the period 2011 to 2013. This was necessary as the aforementioned matters directly and very heavily impact on the most urgent legislative priorities that Trinidad and Tobago must be engaged in producing from both a local and international perspective. It is material to note in this regard that CFATF will, in its plenary to be held this year in June 2016, consider the extent of sanctions to be recommended against Trinidad and Tobago as a result of the requirements for enhanced follow-up, which flow as a direct result of the international observation of the very material legislative and operational shortcomings in our country's AML CFT framework. It must be further noted, Madam Speaker, that CFATF sanctions may require more regular reporting than ordinary biennial reporting, with exact frequency to be determined by CFATF plenary in June 2016. That plenary could also adopt other measures ranging from a letter being sent to CFATF chairman, drawing attention to lack of compliance with FATF standards, to suspension of membership in CFATF, to termination of membership, all with material consequences to the country's ratings, business, and economic well-being. That is not what we as a government will want to occur, Madam Speaker, and I am supremely confident that the work that we have engaged in as a government over the last 7 months for our country, including our very active demonstration of our agenda and workings to all our local, regional, and international partners, will be materially evident and will bring good result. The production of a legislative agenda was always a deliverable for our country. The last government knew this and knew of the international context in which it could be considered. Their failure to act for more than 5 years is entirely and completely inexplicable. Madam Speaker, I am pleased to inform this Honourable House that the Legislative Agenda 2015 to 2020 of the present Government of Trinidad and Tobago has been prepared, and that I have the honour of today releasing it for publication by the Parliament. The Legislative Agenda, Madam Speaker, disaggregates proposed legislation into short, medium and long-term timeframes for proposed bills over the next 52 months. The rationale for publication is to allow the public into the workings of the government, and in particular the legislative review process, which I now chair as Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs. As our continued public forums in the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs demonstrates, we intend to facilitate a constant and dynamic conversation on the law and its efficiency so that the bedrock for reform is clear and present. It is for this reason also that the Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs Office, in that capacity, I have radicalized the provision of information to this Parliament for debates on legislation by circulating material utilized as sources for legislative drafting, circulation of track changes and marked up versions of bills and laws to be amended so that the impact of amendments can be seen in full and proper context. This has also been extended to providing the opposition with detailed identification of the changes to drafts of laws that they may have advanced whilst in government, as against that which this government advances, as for instance seen in the Children and Family Division Bill. The approach of this government in tackling the scourge of crime and corruption and in promoting competence in our institutions is an open book, cards face-up philosophy. The process of making laws must always be transparent and specifically for the good of our nation. Madam Speaker, I want the public to know that as time passes, the government may see it fit to review and even republish the agenda, as it is always and always will be under dynamic and constant review. This is particularly so as the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee has yet to complete its final legislative recommendations arising out of CFATF's fourth round mutual evaluation of Trinidad and Tobago and the National Risk Assessment. And in all the circumstances, we must therefore properly reserve the right to make changes to our published legislative agenda. Madam Speaker, I wish to offer my sincere thanks to the hard-working members of the various ministries and agencies, and in particular to the expertise of all the officers comprising the Chief Parliamentary Council Department, without whom this country would be lost. The Office of the Attorney General and the Ministry of the Attorney General of Legal Affairs is open for consultation on the law. We have forged closer relationships with many agencies in this regard and invite all, including the opposition, to participate in our vibrant democracy as the government is wide awake on issues close to the hearts of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And these documents, Madam Speaker, will be put for public consumption via the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you, Madam Speaker, for facilitating this. It will be available to the public at large, electronically on the website, and by way of access through the Parliament. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Attorney General.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I've been authorized by the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago to make the following statement on what is commonly referred to in the international and local media and in the public domain as the Panama Papers. Madam Speaker, according to the BBC News, in an online article entitled Panama Papers Leaks Spur Global Investigations, published on the 4th of April 2016, a total of 11 million documents held by the Panama-based law firm of Mossack Fonseca have been passed to the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung, which then shared with them and that material with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. 107 media organizations in 76 countries which have been analyzing the documents. The BBC informs that the identity of the source is at present unknown, but authorities across the world are being spurred into action after the huge leak of confidential documents revealed how taxpayers, tax havens, are used to hide wealth. The BBC further informs that the Panamanian company says that it has operated beyond reproach for 40 years and has never been charged with criminal wrongdoing. Since the first revelations internationally, Madam Speaker, a number of investigations have been launched, as the public is well aware, by the French authorities, Austrian, Dutch, and Australian authorities, among others. In fact, the Prime Minister of Iceland has resigned. Coming closer to home, Madam Speaker, the Trinidad Express newspaper in an article by Kamini Maraj, head investigative desk, entitled Exclusive Investigation, Ken Emmerich linked to Brazil bribery scandal, published on the 4th of April 2016, stated that 1. The Panama Papers reveals that Mr. Ken Emmerich, business consultant, described as a former low-level party functionary of the United National Congress, allegedly used a Panamanian shell corporation to channel millions of US dollars to offshore bank accounts, including US 1 million consultancy fee from a convicted money launderer connected to the Petrobras bribery scandal in Brazil. 2. The leaked files provide valuable clues to Mr. Emmerich's business dealings through a Panamanian registered shell vehicle named Pendry Associates Corporation and his US multi-million-dollar connection to Brazilian construction giant Constructura OAS, which was contracted by the People's Partnership Administration in July 2011 to build a contentious and yet to be finished US billion-dollar highway extension to Point Fortin. 3. The Pendry's transaction trail details a complex web of shell corporations across borders, US multi-million-dollar payments routed through the international financial system, and a cast of convicted OAS construction executives and money launderers connected to Brazil's largest ever corruption scandal, which has battered the nation's president, Dilma Rousseff, and threatens to ensnare another former president, Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, on suspicion of kickbacks related to a beachfront property. 4. The MF files expose the connection between Emirates Panamanian offshore Pendry Associates and key figures connected to the Petrobras bribery scandal, namely How Procipio, who was convicted of financial crimes, and Jose Luis Perez from the investment firm Kelus, which had direct financial dealings with Swiss PKB Privat Bank AG. Perez is, of course, known as a subject of police probe. And after that, Madam Speaker, Mr. Ken Emmerich, noted as a high-ranking candidate for the executive of the United National Congress in their recently held internal elections 2015. He was employed, in fact, Madam Speaker, as information has it now, by NIDCO as a marketing consultant from November 18th, 2010. I repeat, he was employed at the state company NIDCO as a marketing consultant from November 18th, 2010 for a term of 12 months at a monthly salary of $35,000, and he resigned from NIDCO on August 2nd, 2011. Madam Speaker, on March 4th, 2011, it is known the former government through NIDCO awarded a design build contract to the same Brazilian firm, Constructora OAS SA, for the lump sum of approximately TT $5.2 billion or $1.6 billion more than the engineer's estimate. The estimated cost to complete that highway is now in the range of in excess of $8 billion, it being only 49% complete. Madam Speaker, investigations reveal that Mr. Emrit is listed as the director of Pembry Consultants Trinidad and Tobago Limited. This company was employed by OAS as a consultant on NIDCO's highway project for a monthly payment of $44,800. Payments to Pembry from OAS appear, Madam Speaker, and seem to have started at the time when Mr. Ken Emrit was still employed at NIDCO. From the findings at hand, Madam Speaker, OAS paid Pembry at least $896,000 up to May 2013. Subsequent payments have not yet been traced, Madam Speaker, but are ongoing. Mr. Ken Emrit is also a director of the following companies: Arema General Contractors Limited and Duncan Transport Limited. NIDCO gave drainage works contracts to those two above listed companies. Following are some of the examples of contracts given. Arema, improvement of Hinkin Road Drain and Footpath, August 2013, $1.658423 million. Drainage along New Street, Captiville, September 2015, $1.155008.25 million. Duncan Transport, mechanically stabilizing earthen retaining wall in Rosilac, July 2015, $3.369156.73. Madam Speaker, all of this in the mix and in context now. As Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, I remind that I am under statute the central authority with responsibility for mutual legal assistance to states who have treaties with Trinidad and Tobago. And as Attorney General, I chair the National Anti-Money Laundering Interministerial Committee. Trinidad and Tobago, as you are aware, Madam Speaker, holds the position of the chairman of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, an organization of 27 states of the Caribbean Basin which have agreed to implement common countermeasures to address problems of money laundering and the financing of terrorism, and to take all necessary steps to ensure the integrity of domestic and international financial systems. In November 2015, at the plenary of CFATF in Trinidad and Tobago, I specifically informed that anti-money laundering, anti-corruption, and counter-terrorist financing would be priority issues for action by this government. I informed then that the focus would not only include legislative amendments, but that it would also include operational efforts aimed at increasing the efficiency of detection and conviction for AML, CTF in Trinidad and Tobago. I'm pleased to inform that the commitments given in November 2015 to CFATF are well in tow, and that the local issues arising out of the Panama Papers are receiving active attention, with particular focus on enabling the efforts of requisite law, investigative, and prosecutorial agencies in and outside of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Personal explanations, introduction of bills, motions relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister, public business, government business, bills second reading.
Honorable members, the debate on the second reading of the following bill was adjourned on Friday, 1st of April 2016, will be resumed. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Strategic Services Agency Act Chapter 1506 to expand the functions of the Strategic Services Agency. Member for St. Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity to contribute on the Strategic Services Agency Amendment Bill 2016. Madam Speaker, Trinidad and Tobago, for better or for worse, has inherited from our colonial masters an adversarial system of politics and the parliament, the judiciary, as opposed to, let's say, a country like France, where the judicial system is much less adversarial. Our parliament is an adversarial system. But having said that, very often in the past 5 years, the then opposition joined with the then government in passing serious legislation, whether regarding a simple majority or a constitutional majority, even though we have this adversarial system of politics. Some of the bills we would have assisted the then government with are the Anti-Gang Bill 2010, Anti-Terrorism Amendment Bill 2011, the Bail Amendment Bill 2010, Firearms Amendment Bill 2010, Interception of Communication Amendment Bill 2010, the Miscellaneous Provisions Kidnapping and Bail Bill 2011, and the Trafficking in Persons Bill 2011, in addition to others. However, that does not mean we agreed with every position that the then government took on the issue of crime. Two bills which we did not support, and for good reason, were the Constitutional Amendment Capital Offences Bill of 2011 and what is famously known in the public domain as the Soldier Police Bill. And I will come to that later on. The point of saying this, Madam Speaker, in laying the groundwork of my contribution, regardless of whether we have different points of views, and regardless of this adversarial nature of the Parliament, we in opposition from 2010 to 2015 aided the government in passing serious legislation to deal with crime when we deemed it fit. Madam Speaker, I want to refer to a document called Policing and Society, Volume 20, Number 4 of December 2010, by Maguire, King, Johnson, and Katz. And the name of the report is this: Why Homicide Clearance Rates Decrease, Evidence from the Caribbean. It speaks about certain factors which a society needs to tackle serious crime, especially homicide. It speaks about environmental factors. It speaks about organizational factors. And Madam Speaker, one of the organizational factors which the last administration ignored and berated the previous administration for was the non-appointment of a substantive and permanent commissioner of police. When they came into office, they gave every commissioner of police contracts, whether it was the Canadians or the Trinidadians. And the point of this, if it is you want to lead a police organization to tackle serious crime, one of the organizational factors as laid out in that report speaks to the appointment, in my view, of a substantive commissioner of police. And when this government tried to do that via a bill piloted here, we heard about political interference, but the bill was simply to give the Minister of National Security the ability to pull the trigger, to activate the process in a non-political way to appoint a commissioner of police. And for that, the Attorney General, in bringing that order here, should be congratulated, and the Minister of National Security.
One. The SSA bill.
Honorable Member for St. Joseph, I appreciate you maybe laying a context, but I'd ask you to please quickly get to the meat of the matter.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me just be lucidly clear. For those who can't understand, or can't hear, or will not hear, we are debating the Strategic Services Agency Amendment Bill, which has to do with serious crime, and everything I have laid forward, Madam Speaker, is to deal with serious crime, including homicide. We talk about we must have public cooperation, prosecutorial and judicial decision-making, forensic capacity, and now I come to the seventh factor, the legislative agenda. So I was just laying the groundwork. And in coming to the legislative measures, which we are here about today, I must again congratulate the Honorable Attorney General for coming to the Parliament, keeping a solemn oath and a solemn promise for the first time in 6 years to lay a legislative agenda. So, Madam Speaker, why are we here with this Strategic Services Amendment Bill? It seeks to amend the remit of the Strategic Services Agency. And how and why? How and why is this bill seeking to expand that remit? By expanding and broadening the law enforcement, coordination, and intelligence functions. And that is what we need, Madam Speaker, intelligence. By broadening the scope and functions of the strategic agency itself, and by expanding the definitions of serious crime in Clause 3. Madam Speaker, I want us to pay particular attention to the word I am using very often, intelligence. Because we have gone past the day where we must have a physical presence, a police on every corner to do policing. We have gone past that, as my contribution will show in a very short while. We have to be able to gather information, take that information and convert it into intelligence. And hopefully that intelligence will lead to usable evidence in a court of law so that you could get what we call a successful conviction. And that is one of the key foundational elements of what we are trying to do by expanding the remit of the Strategic Services Agency. Intelligence, information, eventually leading to successful prosecution for serious crimes. Madam Speaker, let us look at what has not worked in the past, because we are bringing a measure here to say, we think in this administration, this is going to work. But let us understand where we came from and what has not worked. The opposition in their contributions were concerned about the appointment of the director. And the impartial observer, Madam Speaker, I put it to you, following our politics from 2010 to 2015, will also be concerned in that period about how appointments were made. Madam Speaker, it is not here the time and place to go over names of appointments which were made between 2010 and 2015, which is now giving the opposition some discomfort. Sorry?
Honourable Member for Couva South, there's a particular way to make an interruption. If not, could you kindly please observe the rule with respect to members who are not speaking? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the period 2010 to 2015 will go down in history in the Commonwealth as the most grotesque period of public administration when it comes to appointing people. And that the opposition now has a reason to be scared. But in successful administrations, do we think this will happen again? Whether it's a NAR government or a UNC government? Even the UNC under Mr. Basde Pandey never went the way that our friends opposite went. Never. So we are not going to go down that part of a grotesque period of public administration to appoint someone to the SSA, which is not in keeping with the values and norms of the People's National Movement or what the society at large expects from an ethical government. What has not worked again, Madam Speaker? Because this SSA bill talks about serious crime, including homicide. Madam Speaker, I want to turn to page 29, if you let me, please, talking about innovation for lasting prosperity, the medium-term policy framework 2011 to 2014 of the last administration. Because we have to understand that if we have to tackle serious crime, including homicides, we have to know what did not work. In the chapter on page 29, this is the last administration's policy position, because our friends opposite, during the debate, and I have to remind them in case they come up with a standing order, they spoke about homicide detection rates. So I'm responding to what they said 2 and 3 weeks ago. These are the targets for homicide detection rates which the last administration published for all to see. Reduce the number of gangs in operation, increase crime solvency rate, increase homicide detection rate, and these are the targets that they put forward to the population. To increase homicide detection rates to 15% in 2011-2012, they wanted to then increase it to 20% in 2012-2013, increase it to 25% 2013 to 2014, and then increase it to 80% detection rate by the end of their term in office. Do you know what the detection rate they left us with here? According to an article in the Newsday of Thursday, April 7th, the detection rate was 17.8% between August 2014 and March 2015, but for the same months up to late 2015 was as low as 8.6%. Yes. This is where we have gone. Simply publishing in a nice glossy document that you wanted a homicide detection rate of 80% does not make it happen. What will make it happen is intelligence and information gathering, and that is what this SSA amendment bill is seeking to do. No wishful thinking published in this document will make it happen. It will make it happen by political will and by an Attorney General who understands how to bring legislation to this office. What will not work again, Madam Speaker? I spoke earlier about the bills we supported on crime, and I spoke specifically about 2 pieces of legislation which we did not support on crime. And again, just for those who were not here, they mentioned these in their contributions 2 and 3 weeks ago. The police soldier bill, which was mentioned, when that came to the House and came to the population at large, we on this side, sorry, you want to raise a standing order? We on this side took the position we will not support that bill as a crime-fighting measure to tackle serious crime, which is the objective of this bill. It took an independent senator to lay bare the falsities of the then Attorney General speaking about the use of that method in Jamaica, and it took a then Senator Arawi in opposition, now Attorney General, to lay bare the falsities of the then Attorney General claiming that similar measures were working in Grenada. These things don't work. So what is going to work? The opposition raises the issue in their contributions about what is serious crime. So I want to just give them something to look at as far as serious crime is concerned. The definition of serious crime, and this is taken from the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. Serious crime is defined in Article 2, subparagraph B of the Organized Crime Convention as meaning conduct constituting an offense punishable by a maximum deprivation of liberty for at least 4 years of a more serious penalty. So this answers some of the questions as to the opposition, what they were raising as to what was serious crime. Serious crime also talks about mutual assistance, and the AG spoke about that just now when he was laying down his legislative agenda. Serious crime in this SSA amendment speaks to things like organized crime, and it speaks to the mutual assistance under the central authority under the Office of the Attorney General. Speaks to extradition, and that the person who is subject to a request for extradition whether they are located in a territory or not, how you go about it. And this again refers me, and should refer the population, to that grotesque period of administration between 2010 and 2015, when we could not tackle serious and organized crime when it comes to extradition. Madam Speaker, to further add and to comfort the opposition as to what is serious crime, because many speakers raised the issue of what is serious crime. The Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, Serious Crime in Trinidad and Tobago, an empirical analysis using time series data between 1970 and 2007. And how do they term serious crime? Serious crime: all crimes carrying a penalty of 5 years or more imprisonment for which proceedings have been instituted in the High Court of Trinidad and Tobago. So we have a good idea of what serious crime is. But what are the approaches to serious crime that we must have to complement and work with this Strategic Services Amendment Bill 2016 we have before us? I have often said in the Parliament in opposition that you can't pass laws for everything, and that is a truism. We must, as a society, have a basic respect for law and order. And let's admit it, Madam Speaker, we don't. That is not the UNC's fault, not a PNM fault, not a NAR fault, not a UNC fault under Mr. Pandey. It's a societal and global problem that we have, where we don't have this basic respect for law and order. We also in Trinidad suffer from having low faith in our law enforcement agencies. And this bill seeks to give law enforcement agencies the intelligence gathering, intelligence coordinating capabilities to fight crime. Madam Speaker, one of the most important ingredients in this fight against crime, and I will say it over and over, and I think whether we are adversaries across this space here, 3 swords lengths apart, because I think Parliament was constructed in the early days when people had swords and came to Parliament, we must be 3 sword lengths apart.
We have to be teacup lengths apart.
Teacup here. Madam Speaker, I think all 41 of us could agree that until and unless we reach to a place where we have better parenting, no set of laws are going to work. But as a legislature, our responsibility is to bring legislation. We must go back to a time and a place where there was respect for law and order, respect for parents, respect for teachers, respect for priests, respect for imams, respect for pundits, respect for your auntie. We must go back to those days. You must have respect for your opinion leaders. Because now we have moved from an era where children have no respect for law and order to antisocial behavior taking over many facets of national life. We have now moved to the I generation, where everybody has an iPhone, an iPad, an I this, an I that, and they don't know what the word we is again. Serious societal problem that we have. And what we are now facing, which this bill seeks to do, is to get a grip on the use of technology in committing serious crime, as redefined in this bill. Because technology has now become a crime enabler. The computers, the smartphones, the iPads, the tablets, the internet, it exploits the vulnerability of traditional crime fighting methods, which is the physical presence on streets. We saw recently, in an attempt to tackle serious crime, the federal government of the United States had a titanic battle with one of the largest corporations, Apple, to force Apple to decrypt one of their phones. At the end of the day, Apple held on to its constitutional position, but it forced the government to become a hacker. And that is where we are going. And this bill seeks to introduce the conversation as we move forward on cybercrime. Because cybercrime, and this bill speaks to cybercrime. This bill, Madam Speaker, if we don't get a handle on cybercrime, it leads to loss of business confidence, and we need that now. It facilitates child and human trafficking, and we know we have a problem in Trinidad with human trafficking. And cybercrime, as this bill seeks to address, is completely borderless. Completely and totally borderless. So it places particular challenges on your intelligence gathering security apparatus, like the SSA, like the police. And that is why I want to recommend this bill to all and sundry. It will help us with money laundering and the FIU. And I pose the question to all of us here. Let's be honest. How successful has the Financial Intelligence Unit been? When you read the reports of the FIU, all you hear is these astronomical figures about the number of suspicious transactions. But has anyone been prosecuted? The answer is no. So we have the legislation, we have the person, we have the body. We have complied with FATF and CFATF as far as we can in bringing FIU legislation. But at the end of the day, has it had an impact on money laundering? Has one person been brought before the courts? And it's an inglorious no. Which speaks to the need now for a coordinated approach to data collection and intelligence gathering, which is what this bill seeks to do. Because as I always say again, you can't put a policeman by every computer. You can't put a policeman by every iPhone. You can't have the cybercrime unit all the way, everywhere, all the time. So this bill is critical not only to the solvency rates of things like murders, serious crime, kidnapping, stealing of wet man car, which is a term I never knew existed, because you have to gather the data on the wet man car if you are going to target it, not being a wet man myself. Right? Positive. I drive a X-Trail and a Honda Accord. So, Madam Speaker, and they both use super gas. So, Madam Speaker, this bill is about focused intelligence gathering, its coordination, and the role of a central depository. And for that, I want to recommend to all to read Clause 3 of the bill. And Clause 6, the main functions of the agency are to, and the reason why I'm going through Clause 6 in detail is that during the debate, this is being put forward that we are creating this army to go after people. Not so. This bill seeks to 6(1)(a) act as an office for the centralization of information that could facilitate what? Detection and prevention, and for coordinating operations. And that's why I say we need this bill if we are to tackle the abysmally low homicide detection rates. We need this. 6(1)(b), to develop strategic intelligence. The police service of today has to be intelligence-driven, data-driven. To advise on policy formulation, 6(1)(d). The reason I am going through Clause 6 in detail, Madam Speaker, is that during the debate, because you see the disadvantage we have about debating this 2 and 3 weeks after is that we probably forgot what issues were raised by the opposition. This is not about a private army. This is not about necessary spying on everyone. It is about gathering intelligence to protect society. It is about disseminating information. When we go to Clause 6, again, Madam Speaker, It talks about to establish channels of communications with the services and corresponding services of other countries. Madam Speaker, I want to pause there for a while and fully explore this. To establish channels of communication with the services, corresponding services of other countries. Madam Speaker, if we are to tackle serious crime, organized crime, we must learn from lessons of the past of other countries and our own. One of the main criticisms coming out of 9/11, when New York was attacked, was that the different agencies, the FBI, the SIA, were not sharing information. They were operating in silos, correct? CIA and the FBI. Sorry. And you are right, Madam Member for Siparia. Major agencies were not communicating. Siloing of information. Let's fast forward to 2016 and look at the recent interventions in Belgium. What has come out there is not only the non-sharing of information, but Belgium has a particular peculiarity where the population speaks about 6 different languages. You have French, Dutch, German, Wallon, which is a local variant of French, and Flemish. So you have not only agencies not speaking to each other, but you literally don't have the same people in Belgium speaking the same language. But what about Trinidad and Tobago? If we are to tackle serious crime again, we have to understand that what happened in 1990 in Trinidad was partially as a result of our agencies not speaking to each other. And Madam Speaker, if you allow me, I want to refer to the report of the Commission of Inquiry into the events of 27 July 1990, Volume 2, March 2014. And with your permission, I want to recommend to the population at large that on page 781, if you allow me to quote for the Hansard, it requires no inexorable logic to conclude that the very fact that an attempted coup d'etat took place in Port of Spain on 27 July 1990 was clear evidence per se that there must necessarily have been deficiencies in the national security arrangements of Trinidad and Tobago. It goes on to say there were at least 4 agencies which gathered information and intelligence. And Madam Speaker, what this bill seeks to do in Clause 6, as I alluded to earlier, was to be a central repository for all the intelligence gathering agencies to deposit information. So I go on. There were at least 4 agencies which gathered information and intelligence, each performing at different levels of efficiency and apparently, and this is what is scary, and apparently independently. So some were efficient, some were inefficient, but some were organizing themselves independently of each other. The National Security Council was that body to which the 4 agencies reported their process information and any action that might have been taken. Madam Speaker, when one reads page 781 of that report, it is a frightening indictment of the 4 agencies at that time. Whether these things happen today, I have no idea. But what I know is that if we are to tackle serious crime and prevent the siloing of information as occurred in 9/11 with the FBI and the CIA, which maybe happened in Belgium and which happened here in 1990, I recommend this Strategic Securities Amendment Bill 2016. Clause 6, to me, in my layman terms, is the most crucial part of this bill. Madam Speaker, as I come to a close, because I don't intend to detain this House too long, I don't intend to detain the House too long. I want to recommend that even though we have this, as I started off, with this adversarial style of politics, I don't see anything in these amendments I see nothing in this bill that deserves the term a Molotov cocktail. I really don't. I really, really don't. If it is the opposition has objective proposals to make them. But the same way we joined hands with the then government between 2010 and 2011 to pass serious bits of legislation that required not only a simple majority, but constitutional majorities, this is what this system of politics can bring to us. We helped you with almost all of your anti-crime measures. And today, I want to ask those opposite to be responsible, do the correct thing, and support the Strategic Services Amendment Bill 2016 so that once and for all, we can give our intelligence gathering apparatus the framework and the background to collect information, turn it into intelligence, so that we can go to the court with evidence which will lead to what we all want, successful prosecution. Madam Speaker, I thank you very much.
Member for Oropouche East.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to join this debate on possibly one of the most critical pieces of amendment that this government will ever bring to the Parliament. And notwithstanding, a few minutes ago, the Attorney General beat his chest and announced that he had sent a letter to the clerk with a legislative agenda. Regrettably, I haven't seen the legislative agenda yet. But I'm very thankful to receive his speech. But we have not seen the legislative agenda. So we don't know what is the first issue, what is the priority 1, priority 5, priority 10. We have checked the website as well, and as of this minute, I think we have not received the legislative agenda. So we welcome the speech, but we would also like to see the legislative agenda eventually. Because that is important, Madam Speaker. It is important, Madam Speaker, because I could have positioned my opening statement in the context of their legislative agenda, what they intend to do to deal with crime, national security, and so on. But as of this moment, we don't know. Madam Speaker, I want to begin with a quotation before getting into the bill, a very short quotation. A friend of mine sent this to me, and I wanted to begin by reading it. Spiritual terror is a Nazi concept which translates into the releasing of a veritable barrage of lies and slanders with surgical precision aimed at weakening and destroying one's enemies. It is the promotion of lies as a weapon of political warfare and strategy against one's opponents. The Nazi under Hitler refined this into their campaign to take power as well as to retain power in Germany. I am advocating, Madam Speaker, that this government has embraced this strategy previously when they were in opposition and now in government, and this is a highly dangerous approach that must be exposed. Madam Speaker, regrettably, I even complete my entire run up here.
Honorable member, for may we have some silence, please? Members, please. I'm on my legs. Honorable member, for Oropouche East, I would ask you to be guarded in your statements. There's a very clear innuendo with respect to your opening comment and the following comment you made after that. So please, be at least parliamentary.
Madam Speaker, I'm guarded. Let me get quickly. Regrettably, I don't have much to say about the member for St. Joseph contribution. We heard about Apple, about technology, about cyber. Somehow this bill seeks to introduce a conversation on cybercrime. That to me jumped from the sky. I wasn't sure about that, but I want to get quickly to the bill before us. Madam Speaker, when I had the opportunity to read this, I came to a certain conclusion quickly. This is a very, very dangerous piece of legislation. This
if passed in its present form, allows any government and any Minister of National Security to immediately take over the role of an independent, constitutionally protected Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, undermine the role of the Police Service Commission as well. Yes. It is a dangerous piece of legislation, and I do not know what could be more dangerous than this piece of legislation. I am not sure my friend from St. Joseph really, because there was little reference to the bill, understood the issues at stake. I want to begin by saying the minister from Point Fortin, the minister from Dabadi O'Meara, both with military speak, gave us laudable objectives. No one can complain about the objectives that the government is outlining here. Yes, there's need to integrate and synthesize intelligence gathering, share intelligence gathering for the protection of the society to prevent harm and so on. Absolutely no doubt about this. But you will not do it by this amendment bill. This amendment bill cannot do that. What you are doing in effect, and we'll get into the detail in a little while, what you are doing is simply saying we have no confidence in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. We have no confidence. They have failed, and if they have failed and you don't have confidence, then stand up and say so. The government must come out and say we have no confidence in the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. The SSA is now our agency of choice to undertake what has been police work. And that is the issue here. When I was reading this, Madam Speaker, it was fascinating. I read the amendment bill on one side, and I held the Strategic Services Agency on the next side. And it became predictable. Every time you read the amendment bill, because the amendment bill, you cannot simply read it by itself, because every line is reference to something else. All you had to do is every time you see drug trafficking, scratch it off, mark it off, and put serious crime. Anytime you see persons involved in narcotics, take it out and put persons involved in serious crime. They have just serious crime the bill. All they have done is a piece of legislation, and the Attorney General, when he introduced this bill, made the point. I don't want to go into the Hansard now and just repeat everything. This Strategic Services Agency Act came out of an international imperative rooted in the United Nations and in our conventions that we ascribe to, where Trinidad and Tobago by 1995 came to put into law an agency to promote the objectives for which we subscribe to at the international level. And we placed there an agency to deal with drugs, narcotics, trafficking, related matters. They never ever contemplated expanding the ambit of the SSA. That was not there. That was just to deal with, it was legislation pursuant to our international commitments to deal with drug trafficking and narcotics. Today, what they have done is probably one of the laziest piece of work ever in life. They have just scratched out drug trafficking and put serious crime. As if you could do that. You cannot do it that way. If you wanted, the minister from Point Fortin, if you wanted to create a mega spy agency, a national MACO, a CIA, a FBI, then come to Parliament and create an authority in law that can do that. The United States, and the member from Point Fortin gave reference, he said the US have the FBI, they have the CIA, Britain have MI6. Regrettably, you made a reference to Israel. To what is it, Shin Bet? Referencing Shin Bet. Madam Speaker, when I look to Google that agency, part of their mandate is information gathering, interrogation, and methods of torture.
What?
Now, clearly, the member for Point Fortin can't be suggesting that he will take responsibility for methods of torture. I mean, there are some people, if they speak, they torture you enough. But the point I'm making is it is ill-conceived to believe that an institution set up in 1995 for the express role of dealing with drug trafficking can be morphed by just scratching off drug trafficking and putting serious crime. And that institution can do it. And there are several issues. Many have been raised by the members for Siparia, Shogunas West, and Mayaro. Just to recap quickly some of those. When they introduced by 1995 this bill for the Strategic Services Agency, Because it dealt with only one restrictive, narrow area of drug trafficking, there was a procedure to appoint a director. The director is appointed, unless I'm mistaken, by cabinet, which effectively is the executive. The director is not appointed like the commissioner of police through consultation, coming to parliament, approving the commissioner, debating the commissioner. The director is appointed by the executive. So the director appointed by the executive, who is then in some way responsible for his appointment there, becomes this director who today will have responsibility as an authorized officer on every aspect, intelligence gathering of every aspect of serious crimes. And you all know the list already, kidnapping and homicide and corruption and what have you. But, sedition. And now today, this director and deputy directors, they run a civilian organization that is doing intelligence gathering on all serious crimes. And part of their mandate, which I'll come to now, to keep a database on persons involved in serious crime. The police estimate that there are over 1,000 persons in this country who are, quote unquote, if we can agree what involved mean, who are involved in serious crime. You're telling me 3 people appointed by cabinet now will keep a database on 1,000 plus citizens involved in serious crime? According to the law as exists now, the director can do nothing without consulting the Minister of National Security. That is not being amended today. That is not being amended today. That part they left. That part they left. So this director, who is in charge of a civilian organization, is today accountable, cannot move without consulting the Minister of National Security, and he or she is now in charge of spying on the whole population. They can, unlike the police, you know why the police was given this by 95? This happened, and there's a logic to this. The police operate with a certain constitutional independence. The Commissioner of Police is not answerable to the Minister of National Security. They conduct their business based on what they call reasonable suspicion and so on. And the Commissioner of Police is under no obligation in the law to report to the Minister of National Security. So he does his job. But the Director of Strategic Agency has to consult the Minister of National Security. And my friend from Point Fortin, by Minister of National Security, I am not saying you necessarily. And you know that. I mean, we know each other. You know that. So there are 3 ministers there?
Oh, yes.
All right.
Port
of Spain North, you there too? Because I know Port of Spain North is a junior. I don't know if he's there as well. Madam Speaker, the point I'm making is that in this setup, they are not amending how the director is appointed. So a director takes his instructions, consultations from the minister, and is now, according to this amendment, responsible for all serious crime intelligence gathering. I've heard all the speakers, including St. Joseph. They say the problem is what? Siloing. You know, when the Attorney General speak, one thing, he has good management talk. It's just a certain verbosity. So when I read his contribution, I wasn't here on the day, I heard about inter-articulating laws and siloing, and this, the UNC birthed this formula and so on. All that is good. But the point we are making is that the law of 95 did not contemplate this expanded range. That is why, even though there were protests, director appointed by cabinet. Today, you have usurped the power and authority of the Police Service Commission and the Police Service. So, Pertel, if today, God forbid, this legislation is passed, what the Police Service doing next week? Their functions gone. Because the SSA is now in charge of intelligence gathering, coordination, database management of everyone involved in serious crime. You have just undermined the police service. The method of the appointment of directors speak to that director being answerable to a Minister of National Security. That is not changing today. The CIA director, while appointed by the president, they go for confirmation hearing before Congress. And Madam Speaker, let me get to the matter one time. In the initial Strategic Service Agency Act, Madam Speaker, we are told how the director is appointed and directors. We are not told how they are terminated. If you are going to give such expansive powers to an SSA director and directors, assistant directors, You should provide for their termination as well in law. Because if you don't do that, you will get a letter, which I'm going to read into the record now. Yes. And as I say, I mean no disrespect at all to any cabinet minister. You will get a letter like the one I have in my hand here, which was addressed, dated 14 December 2015, addressed to a former employee of the SSA. I will not call the employee name. The letter states, this letter represents formal notice that your employment as the position is terminated effective immediately. The decision to terminate is based on the following grounds. This is December 14, 2015. Here are the grounds. Loss of confidence and trust by the Honorable Minister of National Security in your ability to perform your duties and to represent the SSA. But how the minister reach there? Yeah. The minister now arrive on the compound. How you lose confidence already? How you lose confidence in a top-ranking officer already? In 3 months you lose such confidence, you fire him. And it is signed by an interested name, Matthew Andrews, Director SSA. But I saw this name, Matthew Andrews, before me now.
In a newspaper?
In a newspaper clipping today, dated 15th April 2015. Express, page 4. Axe SSA directors threaten lawsuit. And one of these persons who are fired by the name of, who is it?
Tell us.
Denny. And it is not Denny Ali from Tottenham Hotspur. Denny says, and it is in the legal documents here quoted in the papers, I was informed by Mr. Andrews, he informed the person, and I quote, Madam Speaker, I'm only quoting here, he said to me there were too many Indians in the agency.
What?
And that he felt the minister wanted to get rid of some of them.
That sounded like Petro Singh.
He asked if I could assist in that process of identifying the weak ones who would not put up a fight but go quietly.
There's only
Denny is reporting that Mr. Andrews came to him and said, would you help me to get rid of the Indians in the SSA? Scandalous. Now this is scandalous. Alarming, to say the least. The response of the Attorney General Alwari on the same page, no cabinet directive to fire based on race. Well, thank God for that. Huh? Thank God for that. Could imagine if you had a directive. But this is where the SSA reach because of the law that is in place today. Axe SSA directors. And a termination notice, loss of confidence and trust by the Honorable Minister. Which agency in this country fires someone and say the minister lost confidence in you? Now, this man probably never met the minister in his life. The minister lost it should not happen this way. And today, you want to empower the SSA to spy on everyone, on any serious crime, and the minister. So, hypothetically, and the member for Siparia spoke at length, I don't want to repeat this. There are no accountability measures in this amendment bill. And because there are no accountability measures, there is no transparency and no guarantee to protect the rights of citizens, to protect the rights of MPs. Suppose a minister goes to the director and says, listen, we understand a cabinet minister involved in some hanky-panky here and there. We understand that he's doing this, so he's undermining the Prime Minister, doing A, B, and C. Put a tap on the phone and just get some information for us. Something happened in Sumad Gardens last week. Let's say the Sumad Gardens discussions. And
table discussion.
You tell the director, Sumad Gardens last week, check the phone records of 3 ministers attended the meeting. We understand that they met there. The director feels now if he cannot and will not do that, he will get a letter. You are terminated. The minister has lost confidence and trust in you. Yeah. That is the agency. You cannot, and I want to tell you, this is not PNM, UNC, ABC, XYZ. You cannot put a law in place.
I would like to hear the contribution of the Honourable Member for Oropouche East. Please, continue, Member.
Madam Speaker, you cannot put in law this bill that gives the power to a minister, a member of the executive, who in return takes instructions from a prime minister, that this minister has to be the one in charge of a civilian organization that is a national spy on every single aspect of serious crime. That cannot be done. It is wrong. You are under the directions of the minister. The director is subject to the directions of the minister. May I repeat that? This is in the initial law. So when they took this, all they did, you know, there was a famous chutney singer, Kuva South, you know, Rasika Dindial, and she sang about the lazy man. This is a lazy man approach. You don't want to walk. You want to sit down in a hammock and rock. They don't want to walk. They just took this and just scratch off drug trafficking and put serious crime and expect that this will work. All they talk about coordination of intelligence, and I agree with that. You must coordinate intelligence, Madam Speaker. All they talk about coordination. This will not happen because nothing in the amendment bill require the defense force, the customs, the immigration, and other agencies that collect information. Nothing require you to meet, to collaborate, to synthesize intelligence. No. That happens, the way that it is structured now, under the National Security Council. It happens under the National Security Council, which has representation from all the arms in law enforcement. Nothing in this bill, if God forbid it is passed, will suggest that there will be sharing of intelligence. This bill is really to empower one agency to go spy on everybody who they believe involved. And they do not need reasonable grounds. They don't. They can get a call from a politician. Check out something for me. We understand in a ministry there, a particular member of parliament has 10 companies now that is doing subcontracting work in an agency of government. We want to check on that. Let's check on that. The loquacious Attorney General can check on that.
What, the loquacious?
Ralph Marad say if loquaciousness could have solved crime, this is the safest place on the planet. Madam Speaker, this nothing here, and I challenge any member of the government. Tell me which amendment you are proposing will lead to synthesizing and integrating intelligence.
None.
This is just to ensure the SSA has a blanket and umbrella to cover everything. And when you do that, you are not amending, Madam Speaker, you are not amending the way the directors are appointed. You are not putting into the law, which you may well do if and when you go to a joint select committee. How do you terminate? Maybe you would want to suggest that you terminate an appointment by coming to Parliament for an affirmative resolution of the House. So the national community will hear why a director or assistant director is being terminated. I don't know. You may wish to do that. But you cannot terminate because the minister loses confidence in you when you are giving these enormous powers. But something else now, I want to refer to another piece of legislation here. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I had the pleasure and really the honor several years ago to be chairman of a bipartisan committee of this House to give birth, to use the term of the AG, to the interception of communications legislation. You will recall it was done very early in our term of government because of the scandal too, driven by the scandal which was unearthed, where in the former PNM administration prior to 2010, there was evidence to suggest widespread illegal, unlawful, and scandalous wiretapping and surveillance. Warrantless surveillance of national office holders. Imagine trade unionists, members of the press. And you know why you can't trust now? You know, you must build law, not only for yourself, but for another government and another government after that. That's why you must build law. We have to be careful in this society. We have to be careful. Madam Speaker, I listened to a debate, a national crisis a few months ago. There was a time here, I think it was during the carnival, Madam Speaker, when the former mayor of Port of Spain was fired over comments made, Madam Speaker, on the death of a Japanese national. You all recall that? Yeah. And without this bill in place, a top official of the government, member of their general council, mayor of Point Fortin, jump up. He said, I hope when the truth of the young lady's murder unfolds, some people can handle it. How he know about the truth of people's murder? There are two things. Either he had some intelligence to suggest that he had intelligence and information of why this person was killed that we did not have, or he was just talking rubbish. Now you have to decide which one it was. Whether he talking complete foolishness or he had intelligence. Decide that. But imagine without this, officials of government suggesting that they have information. Then, if ever you needed another example, why not to give power to our government in this way? Quite recently, no other person than the Prime Minister addressing his mind to a matter in the HDC, where some media house suggesting that the former administration gave out houses to media personnel and so compromised them and so on, when nothing could be further from the truth. The preference has always been for police, fire, public servants and so on, but they pick up a few media people here and there who got houses, and then suggesting that none other than the Prime Minister suggesting, and I want to quote, the real scandal here is only fully appreciated when one compares the application and allocation time frame and the direct involvement of a minister, meaning me. Now, how you know when is the application and time frame? The data at HDC is confidential and private. Not even a minister of housing ought to have private files of applicants. How does the Prime Minister know when somebody apply and the time frame they apply and got houses? He's collecting information from a state agency which ought not to be passed to him. Because in that file, you may find out, and what is he doing now?
Members, I would want to caution the member for Oropouche East more on 48.6 in terms of your statement.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, in moving on, all I wanted to suggest is that you cannot trust any administration where high officials appear to have information in their possession which they ought not to have. That's the only point. That's the point. And it is against this background that I am presenting my case here. You don't even have this legislation in place yet, and quoting from people private and confidential records when they apply for housing. And that is dangerous. Madam Speaker, I want to move on to...
Honourable Member, I would ask you at this time to just not move on. Please, members, allow me when I stand to speak. Honourable Member for Oropouche East, I would ask you to withdraw that statement. I've already cautioned you on the particular standing order, which is standing order 48.6, with respect to imputing improper motive. So if you can please withdraw that very last statement.
Speaker, just for clarity, I have no problem doing it. Which statement to...
Problem.
No, but what statement precisely asking me to withdraw?
You just made a statement with respect to the member of the government having information which imputed an improper motive. Please withdraw it.
Madam Speaker, I have absolutely no problem withdrawing it. I withdraw. I withdraw the statement.
No matter whether you have a problem withdrawing it. It's either you withdraw it or you suffer the consequences of not withdrawing it. Thank you.
Good.
Proceed.
So, Madam Speaker, in a response to a reporter in writing black and white, the member for Diego Martin West made statements in response to a reporter, which I quote from. And if that is what I am withdrawing, I withdraw it. But I was just quoting from the words of the member for Diego Martin West to a reporter making a comment on a public issue. Let me move on, because I really don't want to take up too much time there. Madam Speaker, the member for St. Joseph made reference to the 1990 coup attempt and so on. And they're using this to suggest that, listen, we have to implement this draconian legislation, because look what happened in 1990 when we didn't have intelligence, when there was no communication in the intelligence apparatus. Look what happened. Again, trying to scare the population into believing that if you pass this legislation, 1990 may never occur. Madam Speaker, it was the partnership government that had the courage, after several, 2 or 3 decades, to put into place, to institute a commission of inquiry into the 1990 coup. It was the partnership government that did this. Don't forget. And part of the report, which I have in my hand, dated March 2014, Madam Speaker, do you know part of this report speaks to the issue? It is stated in this report at page 751, the same page that the member was dwelling on, where the commission was told, Madam Speaker, the police inspector Thompson insisted and told the commission, I know for a fact that reports were sent to Mr. Richardson, I believe he was the Attorney General then, because after the event and during a discussion, it emerged that Mr. Richardson had them. He said that the government knew that something was to happen but did not know it would have reached that far. Madam Speaker, the government of the day had information, had intelligence that there was a stockpiling of weapons, that those persons pose a threat to the state. The report showed that the political directorate had the information. The point I'm making is that it is not only intelligence alone, W. Mera. It is whether you have the courage and the political will to act on intelligence that you have. That's the issue. Today, yesterday, our information there is that you have now intelligence information on stockpiling of weapons, on threats to the state. And the issue is, what do you do with it? Don't use that to scare the population into believing you have to pass the amendment to the SSA.
Act on it.
Act on it. Because you see, when the former administration got intelligence that there was a threat to the life of the Prime Minister.
Honourable Member for Oropouche East, your 30-minute speaking time have expired. You're entitled to 15 more minutes. Do you intend to avail yourself of the additional time? You may proceed.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, the point I'm making is when the former administration had information or intelligence that there was a threat to the Prime Minister and other members of government, those who were sitting in the opposition laughed. They made a joke out of it. But after 5 years in government, we are proud that there was no attack on the state, there was no attack on the head of government, and there was no attack on any cabinet minister. Because we took action. We took action. The fireman is now attacking me here. You have no fire to attend to? Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker.
Honourable Member, with respect to that comment in reference to the Honourable Member for Port of Spain North St. Anne's West, I would ask you to withdraw that statement. I believe I had ruled on that on a prior occasion.
I withdraw. Madam Speaker, the point is that you must act on intelligence, but don't complain that you don't have, and don't frighten the population into believing that this, if passed, will create some, synergy and integration of intelligence. It won't. There's nothing in this amendment that compel the security unit, defense force intelligence, immigration, customs intelligence to share information. There's nothing that compel them to do that. So do not come to do that. Madam Speaker, this government also have information, other information, Madam Speaker. They have information. The biggest threat facing this country and maybe facing our generation is the threat of ISIS. Is the terrorism involved with the ISIS threat across the globe, including the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, the government has intelligence where there are over 400 nationals of Trinidad and Tobago, men, women, and children who have traveled for military training and involved in the radicalization process. They should act on that. Tell us, what are you doing to safeguard this country? Having the information. They know the pictures. They have pictures, they have information, they have travel details. But they are not going to take action. The Prime Minister stood in this Parliament and acknowledged that that is a challenge last week. He said, well, we'll put the normal monitoring and surveillance in place. What normal monitoring and surveillance? What normal? The government of the day must tell us, are you bringing, well, we have a legislative agenda, but we haven't had the benefit of seeing it yet. Would you be dealing with financing of persons who travel to support terrorism activities? You need to deal with financing of travel as well. If you know 400 nationals of this country, and Madam Speaker, I do not intend to go further.
Lift up that bundle.
I don't intend to go further, but to tell you, if you have information on 400 nationals, men, women, and children, who are being trained now and can return to this country, this is an immediate imperative of yours to deal with it. And this bill will not help. It will not help. It will not help in dealing with the threat of ISIS, which is the biggest security threat of this generation. The member for Carinese will recall, in days gone by, there was a time in our history when people like Stokely Carmichael, and I believe also CLR James, when they were prevented from traveling, one was prevented from coming back in the country, and I think one was prevented from leaving the country. Governments before took strong action against persons who they believe were ideologically not inclined to them or involved in other activities. Governments did that before. What is the government doing today about the ISIS threat? That is serious. What are you doing? A former PNM government lock up a House Speaker, Madam Speaker. I think that was the first female House Speaker. She was locked up, Madam Speaker. I mean, I don't say this with any foreboding.
Limited state of emergency.
But lock up a House Speaker. I think she had to live off a coconut from a tree in the yard.
Yeah, yes.
They did that. But today, they cannot tell us what they are doing to deal with this crisis we face now. And I want to put it to you that changing the law in this way will not help. All you are going to do is create a Mako spy agency to take the job of the police, but without the accountability measures of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. That is all you are going to do here. Madam Speaker, the Attorney General also, in bringing his case, of course, you know, the Attorney General is worthy and wordy. The Attorney General made reference to the FIU and is always want to deal with FIU. It's, you know, they have a big interest in that now. I have the FIU reports from 2011 to 2014, FIU reports, laid in this House. And Madam Speaker, without reading in detail, right, without reading in detail, every time you get a report from the FIU, you know what they speak to? You know what help? You know what help they need? They need increased resources. They need increased IT capacity building. They need increased training. That is the help that they are crying out for in their reports. In this report, nowhere it says we need to integrate intelligence gathering. And it leads me to this question. Where did this recommendation come from? In the years I have had the opportunity to be in government, I cannot recall the Defense Force, the police, the military. I cannot recall any agency in local government, in law enforcement, calling for this type of amendment. Where did it come from? What is the invisible hand that brought this amendment? Is it the same invisible hand that produced the Emailgate scandal? Is it the same invisible hand? Where the FIU speaks in every single report of the FIU, they're asking to increase their capacity for IT, increase training, change laws in some cases to deal with financing of terrorist travel, etc. Nowhere I'm looking, they ask for creating a super spying agency like the CIA. Huh? Where did this come from? I asked them. Or are you just doing that to hodgepodge, pretend that you are doing something? Madam Speaker, it is clear today that the detection rate for homicide is lower than the inflation rate. It's the only country in the world where the detection rate for homicide is lower than the inflation rate.
Gas.
And you are trying to fool the people to believe that, listen, this is what we need. By giving the director, the new director, I cast no aspersions on this man, I think it's Colonel Robinson. I don't know him, I cannot say anything good or bad. But giving this superpower to that director, and the assistant director, I think is the former director, Mr. Clement, has returned in a new incarnation.
What is this
Giving them this, what is his qualification?
What is Clement's
I don't have a clue.
qualification?
Giving this power. Madam Speaker, if that wasn't bad enough, hear this one now. Media release from the Ministry of National Security. Media release, Ministry of National Security, dated 16 February 2016. Madam Speaker, they announced with fanfare that the National Operations Center and the National Training Agency is now what? Incorporated. Well, that can be a lawful incorporation, but incorporated into the Strategic Services Agency. You see what happened there? This national spying unit now has within it, now this is a civilian unit in the Ministry of National Security, has two other units, Security Training and National Operations Center. This is remarkable. The National Operations Center was supposed to be the flagship of national security, coordinating all the arms. If you have a flood, they're supposed to be on top of that with information. If you have a kidnapping, information get to them and they share. That was really the unit to share information, National Operations Center, to manage crowd control for Carnival, to do every single thing possible to coordinate the intelligence units and to coordinate national security. That was why it's called the National Operations Center, with a headquarters. And they were supposed to embark, I think, into some program with a foreign government for their equipment and their IT support and so on. You have taken that now that was supposed to be this mega operations center to help monitor, coordinate security for Carnival, coordinate crowd control, coordinate kidnapping, coordinate any, what would the police call blocking up the road again? And you have subsumed that under the civilian agency that is responsible and reports to the National Security Minister. Now, why I'm hoping the next speaker can tell us, is this practical? The member for Siparia touched it. You are not telling us what is now the your new recruitment policy. What is the new administrative structure, the new staffing arrangement, that you can now deal with 1,000 people involved in serious crime. You can deal with this expanded mandate. You can manage the NOC and the NSTA. It is the same SSA.
Compensation.
And ministers speaking later must tell us, what are you going to put in place? But what you put in place must also be done according to the law. And the Attorney General, who likes to quote judgments and Lord Diplock and Lord Wolf and Lord everything, must tell us whether there's any constitutional breach when there are no accountability measures in a bill like this that infringe the rights of innocent citizens. The issue of privacy has been raised by several speakers.
Yeah, so what right?
And this matter, Madam Speaker, I'm telling you, it will be challenged in court if passed in this present form. The court will determine this, because you come for a special, a simple majority to infringe on the rights of citizens.
That is it.
As if that wasn't bad enough, it is unworkable, it is impractical. I have told you, as I said in the beginning, Madam Speaker, as I said in the beginning, I will tell you, coming down to the end now, the Speaker. I will come down to the end by saying what I said in the beginning. You cannot sit down and draft a bill by just scratching off drug trafficking and narcotics and putting serious crimes. By scratching off that and putting serious crime as about 25 different areas, and saying the same institution, appointed the same way, answerable to a minister, will now become a national spying agency. What is the position of the Commissioner of Police? The police service said they never hear anything about this before in their life. You have now usurped their power and their authority and their work. If the Prime Minister can't find a minister can't be found, would they ask the SSA to find him? The Prime Minister said he had to what? order a minister out of his ministry building. I don't know which minister is that.
Who is that? Who is that?
They had to order a minister. You had to race a minister out of the towers.
Out of the tower?
I had to race somebody out of the towers. Now, I want to tell you that minister was higher.
What?
Because the office is on the 18th floor, I think.
Oh.
The minister was high to ensure that they couldn't find him. He was supposed to be at one ministry on Sackville Street. I think he was in a ministry on the 18th floor high. And the Prime Minister chased him out. And if you know the identity of that minister, in fact, that is one occasion I empathize with the Prime Minister.
What is smoking?
Madam Speaker, how much? A minute. Madam Speaker, let me summarize my argument very carefully. I mean no ill will to any member, and certainly not to point forth in Dabody Amera, when I say that a civilian institution created for a particular limited and restrictive purpose in 1995 cannot just by a pencil and a ruler change their scope, their functions, their role in national security and law enforcement. You cannot do it in that way. If you want to create an authority as a CIA, an FBI, or MI6, do so properly by coming to Parliament. Repeal the law. Just repeal the 1995 Act and bring in new law to create a new authority, properly appointed, with checks and balances, with accountability measures in place, so that the population will have confidence. Because the population has no confidence if you read in the newspaper that ministers and so on have information that they ought not to have. And the population will have absolutely no confidence in this amendment that you are giving the SSA powers, which they never had before. They were not fit for purpose. You are giving them powers now so that persons appointed effectively by the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, answerable to a politician, can now have the right to spy on every single person in this country without reasonable suspicion, without the limitations of the police service. So if you don't like a reporter, you don't like a reporter writing against you every week in the newspaper, you go and tap her phone, you go and put warrantless surveillance, because in the Act, it speaks in the Parent Act about warrantless
Honourable
surveillance.
Member, your speaking time has
Thank you
expired.
very much. Timely reminder, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Laventille West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for my opportunity to make a contribution into this debate. Can't help but just sort out, and for the public record, indicate that the last speaker made much about 400 persons who had gone to battle in the Middle East, and this is a great ISIS threat, and behaved as though this developed since September the 15th, since September 2015. From the information I have, and from the same source that he got that, this was the state of affairs a long time before then. So when he asked what has this government been doing or is doing about it, that question should be for him. What did the last government do about it? That was the case long before September 2015. Madam Speaker, he went on further to tell us that the SSA, is to undermine the police service. Well, I just want to remind the last speaker that the SSA is not the police. The police are engaged in investigations and prosecutions. The SSA is about gathering intelligence simpliciter. And it was made very clear by the presenter of this bill, the Attorney General, that the SSA will not be engaged in any operational activity. So I want to put that to bed immediately as misleading the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, as we went towards the general elections, we promised this country, as part of our national policy, and it was in our manifesto, and I quote, to ensure that our security forces have timely and accurate information on criminal activities, the PNM will adopt an intelligence-led national security model. We are here to keep that promise. Today, we are attempting in this measure, or these measures, to improve the intelligence gathering platform in Trinidad and Tobago. The existing apparatus, as has been alluded to several times before, is quite diffuse and as a result largely or to a large extent ineffective. As has been said before, just to remind us, there are about 27 intelligence units in this country. Every country has them. SORT used to be a single point of contact when it existed. This government disbanded that. Take it off. This government disbanded that. Madam Speaker, the learning that came from all of that is that it is necessary to have a centralized agency on intelligence and with the capacity in this modern world to intercept communications, of course, professional standards that subordinate the institutional subcultures that exist in these diffuse agencies. And as well, the experts tell us there should be a minimum content of a centralized intelligence architecture. We all know that this architecture should have elements, or to describe it, we should have a dedicated, motivated, and system-owning cadre of qualified and vetted men and women tasked with managing, populating, operating, and interrogating, critiquing, and developing the system. A data catchment, case management, information technology system with the capacity to trace, track, prompt, analyze, and forecast criminal trends. Forecast it, requiring law enforcement input so as to affect outcomes within the environment. And lastly, a network of field operatives, including, of course, human intelligence gatherers with data capturing devices, non-human, deployed within the theater of operations with a goal of turning the flashlight into what would otherwise be very dark places. Those are some of the attributes of the system that this legislation is trying to create for the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The new formation here proposed will be the intelligence lifeblood to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. Our key investigation unit. And they have to deal with serious crime. The police service has to deal with serious crime. Intelligence is the lifeblood of this. If the intelligence is limited only to drug trafficking, as existed before this measure, then the police service is limited in that sense by getting a limited stream of information. But the police service has to deal with serious crime generally. And the measure here today is not, as has been said by the opposition leader and the last speaker and a host of them, it is not to this is not changing the power of the SSA. This is improving its capacity, its range, its reach. The power under the SSA Act remains the same. All that is happening here is that it is broadening the range of criminal activity that it can pursue. And the sensible people of Trinidad and Tobago would welcome and appreciate this, because they are the ones who are feeling the brunt of what is happening in this country today. Section 6 of the Act is very, very clear. The functions are stated therein. I don't have to trouble myself to quote them. But nothing in terms of the functions under that law is touched. It is simply a wider range of offenses. They're given more responsibility to look at more serious crimes. And the member facetiously almost, like a comedian, he tells us all we did is the serious crime, the bill. You see how flippant they are? What we have done is to replace drug trafficking, that limited sphere of activity for intelligence gathering, and we broaden it to include all serious crimes. And he flippantly called it serious crime, the bill. Like a... Madam Speaker, I would like to suggest, and of course we had an opportunity to look at this, but since last evening in preparing for this debate, I had a close look at it, and terrorist acts are one of the issues that trouble us. I would want to, if I had an opportunity, to suggest that arson should be one of the serious crimes specifically noted in this. Because as we know, arson is the type of crime that is used by terrorists to achieve a lot of stuff. It is used by murderers to hide evidence, rapists, car stealing. A number of other offenses are attempted to be hidden by arson. And if there's one thing I would like to suggest is that arson becomes a standalone crime in this, as opposed to the generality of serious crime. Madam Speaker, the Caribbean, and I'm quoting from a document here, yes, I'll get the website for the answer a little later. Yes. The Caribbean is a major transit hub for illegal drugs and ammunition. And the flow of illicit guns from the US, Latin America, the Caribbean, results in an increase in gun-related violence in the region. For example, El Salvador has the highest rate of homicides per capita in the world. And this is directly related to the illicit trade in drugs and guns. That is well known to all of us. Trinidad and Tobago is very, very high on the totem pole when you take a good look at it. We are the receivers of a number of illegal firearms. When I was in national security, I tried to get an estimate as to the number of firearms in here. I don't think I ever got what I consider to be a satisfactory answer. What I do know is that it has increased almost exponentially since then. Because every Tom, Dick, and Harry, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, little boys, are able, young women as well, to produce a gun. We have a serious problem here, and it is causing mayhem in this country. There's hardly any deterrent to this thing. There's hardly any deterrent. And on top of that, we have this sad issue of a very low detection rate. It is now reported that this is as low as about 8.5%. Now, we came to government about 6 months ago. This low detection rate has been with us for a very, very, very long time. I heard the member for Siparia and the member for Oropouche East talking about we are undermining the police. The measure in this bill is to strengthen the police, to give them the lifeblood of which I spoke, intelligence, and intelligence-supported policing is where we are heading, and that, of course, will improve their detection rate. Right now, we are down to 8.5%. So the member for Oropouche East wants to know what is the state of affairs in terms of we are undermining the police and we are undermining the Police Service Commission. We have not amended any of those pieces of legislation. All we are doing is giving the SSA a wider reach so that it could support the police service, a matter to which I should shortly return. The member for Siparia, and I was not surprised, senior counsel or not, she wanted to know, and she wanted elucidation on the simple issue about what offenses carry a sentence of 5 years or more. Well, I'll send a first-year law student to research that and go and report to her. Pleasure is mine. I think, as is being carried by these measures, all crimes should be caught up in this. Not just drug trafficking, as I said. All crimes, because all crimes hurt. Whether it's rape, whether it's robbery, whether it's car theft, all hurt. The youngster who sits on the corner with a cell phone, and every time the police vehicle goes up, he calls someone and tells them the police is coming. He may not be committing any immediately detectable offense, but he is contributing significantly to the crime problem. All should be investigated, and we should have power to gather intelligence on all using the measures that are available to us. The Interception of Communications Act allows 3 persons, the head of the SSA, the police commissioner, and the chief of defense staff, to order interception of communication. As I am aware, 2 of these 3 actually do the thing. It is only the SSA that does it. In practice, they will take a request from the other institutions, maybe because they don't have the technological capacity as we speak. But I would think all should be the subject of attention. They all cause us great stress. As I said a while ago, 8.5% detection. The police are responsible for fighting crime, yes, and for detecting murders. I'm not blaming the last government. I have said here many times, you can't blame the government for crime. I've said so in opposition, I've said so in government. But a government has a duty to do certain things. We have a duty to provide the legislative framework in which they can operate and from which they can succeed. And that is one of the reasons why we are here today. It's one of the reasons why we're here today. The detection rate went down. As I pointed out a while ago, it happened under the last government. I am not blaming the government per se for that, but the question must also arise, what did they do in this regard? We are committed as a government to providing the police service with all of the resources it needs to improve its performance in Trinidad and Tobago. We are not berating the police. But the reality is 8.5% is just not acceptable to the government. And it ought not to be acceptable to any of us. So we have to provide them with the legislative, we have to provide them with the financial, we have to provide them with the human resource capacity so that they could do better. But some of us in this house perhaps don't like police. There are some people who, when they hear police, they get jittery and frightened.
48.6.
Honorable member for Naparima, I overrule. There was no mention to any specific member. Continue, please.
I don't know what is wrong with the member. This world has seen governments that were populated by people who were involved in criminal activity. This world have parliaments who have criminals in it. And Trinidad and Tobago may not be unique if that happens here. May not. So we know we have a problem. We know we have a problem. We are not here to undermine the police. We are here to give them strength. But criminals don't like that. Criminals will do anything to stop measures to make the police service more effective in this country. I don't know who they are. I don't detect myself. But I know one thing. Anytime you see anybody objecting to anything that will make the police service stronger and better equipped to deal with the problems we have here, you might have to wonder, Madam Speaker, what is their deep intention? They may be politically correct and say other things. They may find all kinds of reasons why. Because they're intelligent too. They wouldn't tell you it's because they don't like police. They wouldn't tell you it's because they don't like law and order. They wouldn't tell you it's because in the absence of law and order, they feel corruption could run rampant and could go undetected. They wouldn't tell you that. They'll find politically correct things to say. So we understand that very well. And that my colleagues on the other side, as speaking on behalf of the public, who pay them to be in this legislature, I would think, Madam Speaker, that it is reasonable for the public to expect they would support measures like this. But I am not surprised, personally, that they will not. I'm not surprised. I remember when we had the Section 34 issue, the Clause 34 issue, the concept of ad hominem loom large. Ad hominem legislation is legislation that is quite unconstitutionally and improperly designed to meet one individual or one group of individuals in the larger society. There are people who will have ad hominem objection to legislation because perhaps they are wondering how it will affect them personally. That's what the concept of ad hominem means. So I am not surprised that there are parliaments and parliamentarians who will object to measures in this world because they are wondering how it will affect them personally. But we can't do that on this side. We are the government, and we promise the people of this country we'll do everything to make them safer and better in Trinidad and Tobago. And that's one of the reasons why we are here. Crime. And as bad as the figures sung, and then when this government was going out of office, they made it a habit of boasting how this crime went down and that crime went down and serious crime went down. But I always thought to myself, the most serious crime is murder.
It is.
And murder figures were going up while they were with a big grin telling me serious crime going down. With a big grin. And I also pointed out when I was in the Senate in opposition that time that there's a serious issue of underreporting crime in our country. There are many people who tell you they are the I have people who told me personally they are victims of crime but would not trouble to go and report it because they have lost confidence in the system of justice. They don't feel they'll get justice. The public has lost confidence. And if we don't support the police service, it wouldn't be long before the police service perhaps start losing confidence in itself. We as a government, we are duty bound to support the police. And I want to thank every single member of the police service for all that they have been doing over many years since I was in the ranks and before to support the people of Trinidad and Tobago. I thank them. And I would like them to thank this parliament for giving them the teeth and giving them the strength in order that they would do what they have to do, whether it's white-collar crime or otherwise. Yeah, and that's what I'm hearing from the member for Siparia. Pay, pay, pay. All she talks about is money. Money, money, money. Yeah, pay. Right. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker. Yeah. Madam Speaker. I'm not surprised she's talking about pay. When we, the last government, paid for the 3 OPVs they were paid for, that government cancelled them. Yeah. Cancelled them. Telling us about we couldn't afford it. Well, we feel as a government we cannot afford the crime and the burden of crime on the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So we have come here to amend this legislation today to take that burden off of them. And now they don't want to support it. They're giving you all kind of fancy argument about they agree with it. I hear the member for Siparia. I agree with it in principle, but I'm not supporting it. None of them supporting it. On the other hand, when we were in opposition and they came with the anti-gang bill, we supported that in this parliament. And a few days later, they went and abused that legislation, went out there with a state of emergency, took up over 500 people, had to release everyone and embarrass our country, embarrass members of the police service who were told to lock up and you go find evidence after. And cause the public to lose greater confidence in the administration of justice. That was their contribution. That was what they gave the people of Trinidad and Tobago when the people, through us in opposition, gave the necessary constitutional majority support for the anti-gang legislation. We supported as well when they wanted to give the police their own budget head, 64 in the estimates. Police now has autonomy to deal with their budget. The police commissioner is now the accounting officer of the police service and to manage their monies. We give the police the tools, and that's why we're here. And I heard the member for Oropouche just now talking about scandalous wiretapping. And early in their term in 2010, they came here with the Interception of Communications Bill and they regulate wiretapping and all of that. And where did the detection rate go? It went south. Where did the crime figures go? They went south. With all that they said they did. So obviously there's room for more. And we make a contribution to that today. We have issues of human trafficking. Somebody alluded to that. And this bill, you know, is not unique, you know, Madam Speaker. This bill exists in other countries in the world. Let me just give you an example. In the United Kingdom, the Intelligence Services Act of 1994, out of the United Kingdom, Chapter 13, Intelligence Services Act 1994, Chapter 13. Right? Hear what their Section 2 says. All right, before that, Section 1. Section 1, 2C. It says, and I quote, in support, and I'm talking about the intelligence services, in support of the prevention or detection of serious crime. So I imagine there's serious crime there too. Not just drugs and guns, you know. Not just drug trafficking, you know. But serious crime. This is in England. And they have issues to deal with, just like every other state. Perhaps more. Section 2 says, and this says, the side note says, the Chief of Intelligence Service, Section 2.1, the operations of the Intelligence Service shall continue to be under the control of a chief of that service appointed by the Secretary of State, a politician. It's in England. And Section 2 says, the Chief of Intelligence shall be responsible for the efficiency of that service, and it shall be his duty to ensure, and among other things, lists in Roman 3, for the purpose of the prevention or detection of serious crime. And hear what they say, similar to what happens here, because I heard the member for Oropouche East and the member for Siparia misleading the country and talking about they are not accountable to anybody in the SSA. Well, it was accountable to somebody all along. We are not changing its power, as I said. We are not doing anything. All we are doing is giving it more work, more offenses to look at. Hear what the British Act says. The Chief of Intelligence Service shall make an annual report on the work of the Intelligence Service to the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State, and may at any time report to either of them on any matter relating to its work. I remember there was an issue where Britain, after 9/11, in England, they went and picked up 18 suspected Al-Qaeda terrorists in England. And those conscientious citizens who found that they were arrested and kept without warrant, they were arrested without warrant and kept without trial, they went to court, and it got to the House of Lords in England. And the House of Lords found against the British government for so doing. And I was in England at the time, and I saw the Secretary for Home Affairs, the man who is akin to our Minister of National Security, telling the country, I was shocked. He said the court gave its judgment, we read it, we understand it, but the protection of the realm, the safety of the realm is the responsibility of the government. It was amazing. And they kept them in. That happened. And I can understand, because the politicians understand the government has the responsibility at the end of the day for the security of the realm, for the safety of this country. And so the Chief of Intelligence shall make an annual report to the Prime Minister, but here in Trinidad and Tobago, he reports to the Parliament. There's a report laid in this Parliament on an annual basis, and it is open for debate and scrutiny by all members. How could someone stand here and say they are not accountable? How? That is misleading the people of my country. It's just not true. In addition to that, I now chair a select committee on national security. I'm now its chairman, but prior to me, the member for St. Augustine was. And the SSA, as any other platform in national security, will make itself available to that committee and take questions and be scrutinized anytime. It is not correct, Madam Speaker, to say that they are accountable to no one. They are accountable to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. They are also accountable to the courts of Trinidad and Tobago, because if they break the law, they go into court, individual or group. So it is just wrong, simply unintellectually inspiring for the member for Siparia to stand here and say that she should lose her pay.
Give the instructions that I am right.
Don't tell me anything about Mirage, you know. I will come to that. I will come to that. So I'm simply making the point, Madam Speaker, that this is not unique to Trinidad and Tobago. The function of the SSA is intelligence gathering, storing, processing, analyzing, and dissemination of information that is relevant to combating organized or serious crime. The Australia Security Intelligence Organization Act of 1979 does the same thing, and I read it corner to corner. It does not limit the power of that intelligence agency to any single or small group of offenses. It's for all crimes, and that's what we are doing here today. We're dealing with all crimes hurt. And these measures, as the Attorney General pointed out earlier, they have direct interface, interlock with the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Police Service Act, the Defense Act, and the Interception of Communication Act. I remember them telling us about SORT was illegal, and they are building that kind of argument against this. Some petty criticisms about it is being headed by a civilian. That doesn't matter. They don't investigate anything. A civilian could conduct intelligence activity. In fact, while they were there, civilians who were in that place, while the member for Siparia was chairman of the National Security Council, SSA existed in this country. And civilians, and one of the most notorious civilians was a woman called Rashmi Ramnarayan, who was a clerk, low down in the business, and the Prime Minister at the time took her and elevated her to the highest position. We have documentary evidence where she was communicating with officers, middle rank managers in the police service, one of them, Amaraj, who wrote a letter. It was read in the public record in this parliament in response to a request from the then Prime Minister about who was PNM and who was not. And she went in like a bull in a tea shop and mashed up the whole SSA, fire people, and quietly made financial settlements with them when they did not even have the courage to go to court to defend their actions when they were taken to court. So I don't know what they are coming here to tell us in their hypocrisy. We would like you to support the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and you have an opportunity to do that in this bill, to support the police service, these hard-working men and women who need our support, legislatively and otherwise. Sometimes they say, like, my hand is tied behind my back. How do you want me to fight? When we were in office, we sent many of them to England, to Canada, to America for training. For training. That's how we spend public money.
West, your 30-minute speaking time have expired. You are entitled to a 15-minute extension. Do you intend to avail yourself of that additional time?
Most certainly.
You may proceed.
Most certainly. And we intimately understand the issues, you know, and I hope my friends would have learned over the last 5 years, because when they came, I'm not criticizing them anymore. We are now in government, and we are taking this responsibility seriously. All the old talk about what they do and all that, we're not too much dealing with that. But we are dealing here today with intelligence. I remember when they met Cash in that place, they did not even at that time understand that you pay informants in cash. And they say they found so many cars. These guys had to have cars that they could change a fender on, a door on, the color on today for tomorrow. Because it has happened in this country when I was in national security, that the firms that we rented cars for to do intelligence work, some of the little boys inside of those firms would inform the criminals which cars the police hire. So when the police think he's doing intelligence and undercover, somebody's watching him. So we found it necessary for them to acquire their own cars and to be able to change the color in the morning, a paint shop overnight, and put a green fender on the blue car and just turn it around. They didn't understand that. Their feet were not wet. I hope they would have learned by now. They don't understand the thing. They don't understand. And to the extent that they do, they are deliberate not to give the kind of support that this country cries out for. And that is why they landed on their skins next door. But the public was not satisfied. public was not satisfied. So, Madam Speaker, there's a lot more that could be said. I am asking my friends on the other side to think and to think again. We have now wanted an explosive murder rate. An explosive murder rate. Every minute, look, they used a grenade to launch an attack in Barataria. And I want to congratulate the police service. I see they hastened in there. I want to congratulate the Minister of National Security, who advised us all along that the investigation was focused. And I saw that they were able to bring perpetrators to justice in quick time for a grenade attack. That is terrorism. But left to my friends on the other side, that would go undetected as the other 90% of murders and offenses over the last 5 years. We have promised the population we will do something about it. And I want to share this with you. We are unafraid of the future. For my own part, for my government, for our government, we are unafraid. We are not worried about next election and all of that. We trust in the wisdom and the dignity and the decency of the people of this country. We are prepared to do that which is necessary. And we are not going to be cowed by the possibility that they wouldn't like it. As I said last week, in the measures on what was it? A motion last week, the finance motion. Everything that the Minister of Finance did, we did it knowing that it was going to hurt elements of the society. We did it knowing that it could lead to some political unpopularity. But we trusted the people, and so far, they have kept faith with us because they know we are doing what is right for them. This measure is simply designed to do just that. And Madam Speaker, as I thank you for the opportunity to have contributed, I call on my friends on the other side to put aside their ad hominem and selfish ways and to support these measures, not for me, because God will continue to look after me and I should be all right, but for the people of Trinidad and Tobago on whose behalf I plead with them here today. I thank you.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Having listened to my colleague, the Member of Parliament for Laventille West, it is clear that he is disappointed and that he must be suffering from shell shock, having to be removed from the waterfront and shifted to Richmond Street. How could he? He says, for example, that he wants to suggest that they include in the remit of the SSA bill as amended arson and all types of crimes. Is he part of the cabinet? Is he part of the cabal that makes decisions on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago? Clearly, if he has to come here to suggest to his colleagues, he's not part of the inner sanctum. And he makes the point that Trinidad and Tobago, we have...
Madam Speaker, may I did make it very clear that in my last read of the measure...
Devoda?
No, my friend has given way.
Oh.
My friend has given way. Managed to be courteous enough. He's given way. I was simply saying that as I read this bill again last night, I said that. I had another thought. And we are free to express our intellectual acumen and thoughts here. That's all I did. And I commended it to my friends. Had I not said it in public, they would never have known. So he should be thanking me and stop being as obtrusive as always.
It is, Madam Chair, it is manifestly clear that he is still shell-shocked, so he gets thoughts after the fact, when he ought to be in a position to contribute. But he says that Trinidad and Tobago has a significant number of people fighting with ISIS in Syria. My colleague indicated that there were 400 citizens and their families fighting. And I want him to know, the Honourable Member for Laventille West, that Trinidad and Tobago on a per capita basis has more than 100 times the number of citizens that the United Kingdom has fighting in Syria. And the question arises, that is why the Kamala Prasad Bisesa, when she co-sponsored the resolution in the United Nations, it was that side that made the comment that we are putting Trinidad and Tobago at risk. Madam Speaker, we were already at risk. And I make that point only because my colleague alluded to that point. He also said that the SSA will not have operational capabilities with respect to crime. Is he aware that the NOC, the National Organization, NOC, Operations Center, will now come under the SSA, and that provides it with the capability to deal with counterterrorism and the list of things that are listed here. But today, Madam Speaker, to get to the substantive point, we are here to discuss the important SSA Amendment Bill of 2016. This will amend the SSA Chapter 5 Act, Chapter 1506. And under the Parent Act, Dangerous Drugs, these amendments would expand the responsibility of the Director of the SSA and by extension the Minister of National Security. Clause 4 of this bill will create a new mega agency of which he will have significant power. And this agency will be empowered to deal with matters relating to the prevention of serious crime, including aspects relating to detection and prevention. When I look at the list of serious crime, and it is easy for us to say serious crime, there are about 67 items of crimes that now comes under the remit of the SSA. Whereas in the past it was illicit trafficking in narcotic drugs and dangerous drugs, it now includes treason. It now includes terrorist acts. It now includes kidnapping. And I ask the question, unless this was a cut and paste piece of legislation, why chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons? We hear money because no one on this side or that side or in Trinidad has the capability to do that. But it's an all-encompassing legislation, copied and pasted into this legislation. And corruption, also corruption, firearms and ammunition. And it includes sedition. It's 67. I think some of us have gone through that, some on this side. But I recall the Calypsonian years ago singing and saying that he freed, and I quote here, I freed Carl. I freed the Baron of Maraval. And he went on to say why he was scared. And then they asked him, he itemized a number of instances that he was scared about. And he said, I ain't talking about that because I freed the Sedition Act. If Chokdas was scared of the Sedition Act, I am scared of this legislation because it has 67 times the kind of power that was envisaged by the Public Order Act. So this gives us the opportunity to look at this legislation, and we say it brings to the forefront the government's plan to deal with crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago. And all of us acknowledge that the crime is a serious problem, it's intractable, and that steps must be taken to deal with it, and we are prepared to support you. But the legislation must conform to best practices and not deal with the fundamental rights and freedoms that we possess. The steps must be justifiable, they must be sensible, they must be transparent to ensure that we do not create an even greater monster than we are trying to solve. So we must look carefully at what the government is asking us to do here today, and critically assess if there are sufficient checks and balances against increased power the government is asking us to give to them. We are given an opportunity here to look at the role of Parliament in providing the proper oversight on the executive and state agencies. And Madam Speaker, the Oversight Committee, the Parliamentary Oversight Committee, is chaired by a member of the Cabinet of the executive of Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, he is bound by cabinet collective responsibility. And it does not have the kind of oversight that first world countries have with respect to counterintelligence agencies. And I will deal with that later on and show that the honorable member for Laventille was misquoted by not pointing out the myriad and the plethora of oversight mechanisms that exist in the USA, Canada, Britain, France. And we can look at the crucial point of government power versus citizen rights. And I'll speak later on, Madam Speaker, to the iconic former member of Naparima who said that he left a legacy for us to protect the rights of the individual vis-a-vis the executive, Trinidad and Tobago. But I'll quote that later on. So we are here on this side, not to obstruct, but to represent the interests of the people. This is the House of Representatives. And as James Madison, one of the founding fathers of the United States, noted, that there are more instances, and I quote here, of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. What he was saying essentially is that the power of the individuals and our liberties could be usurped gradually. And I sense from this legislation that we are on a slippery slope to executive empowerment and executive dictatorship. Let us look at the parent legislation, looking specifically at the role of the appointment of the director. Section 4 of the Act lays out the appointment and functions of the director. It says he shall be appointed by the president for a term not exceeding 5 years, terminable at any time, and shall be eligible for reappointment at the expiration of his term. The Act also makes the director the principal advisor to the minister on matters relating to this Act, and says the director shall be subject to the directions of the minister. Let me repeat. The director shall be subject to the directions of the minister. This is already law and will not be amended by this legislation. In the 1995 legislation, Parliament gave power to the executive with a caveat that it was limited to drug trafficking. But Section 6 has given this so much power that we have to ask, have we expanded executive power? And is there the proportional checks and balances to safeguard the rights of the citizenry? And Madam Speaker, no amount of fancy language, no amount of mamagai, and no amount of bullying will get them to get us to agree to legislation that is inadequate. Inadequate. Absolutely inadequate. John Stuart Mills noted in his publication on liberty in 1859, more than 157 years ago. 57 years ago, they could come up with the ideas. And we today, and those on that side, come up with legislation that I will prove later on is lacking in safeguarding the citizenry. He said in the essay on liberty in 1859 that societies need a system of legal and political rights and constitutional checks and balances in order to prevent the innumerable vultures from oppressing ordinary people in a perpetual struggle between liberty on the one hand and authority on the other. But Madam Speaker, if they think that the words of Mills is outdated, we only have to look at the World Bank and IMF template for serious legislation. When you look at the template for the FIU, for example, World Bank says FIUs need to be given operational autonomy to allow them to carry out their assigned tasks without undue interference. End of quote. As a government agency, the FIU, which is similar in legislation to what we are talking about today, must be given the degree of autonomy necessary to fulfill its responsibilities while being accountable for the results it achieves. It goes on to say the power to appoint and the power to remove the director of the FIU from office is critical to the independence of the unit. And the World Bank looked at Antigua and Bermuda as an example of best practices. And in the Antigua and Bermuda legislation, the power to appoint a director of the FIU resides with the Prime Minister. He's appointed by the Prime Minister on the advice of Cabinet. But interestingly, and not included in this legislation, the director can be removed only for reasons set out in law and on the recommendation of a select committee of the House of Representatives. Antigua and Bermuda has that kind of intellect in their legislation. Ours is cut and paste. All the power resides in the Minister of National Security. And I always say that the Minister of National Security is a person whom I have immense trust and respect. But we are making legislation not for you, sir. We are making legislation for an office that will perhaps exist beyond this Parliament. In our legislation that creates the FIU, Act number 11 of 2009, I quote, "The director shall not disclose or cause to be disclosed to the minister or any other person except in accordance with this act the personal or financial details pertaining to an individual or person or business. Examples include information obtained from a financial institution or listed business concerning any account held by a customer or business." So the FIU legislation insulates the director and the minister in terms of what should be the content of the information between them. The minister is limited. He cannot ask, for example, information on Rodney Charles's bank account, because that would be ultra-virus, the legislation. So just as the political directorate sees the need now to expand the remit of the SSA by the way of this amendment for the good of the citizens, to protect us against crime, should they not also see the need for a check against this power? Perhaps some sort of autonomy for the director. And that is why we say that this legislation ought to go to the Joint Select Committee, where we can think about it and use our collective wisdom to ensure that our legislation conforms with best practices. Because this, we must take lessons put forth by great thinkers on law and government and be very wary of the gradual and silent encroachments of those in power. Because this bill is silent on what measures would be put in place to stop abuses by the executive in the light of expanded powers. I want to ask the government, what other jurisdictions did you look at when drafting this amendment? What international best practices did you assess? And when thinking about mechanisms to fight crime, the information is out there if one really looks. Going back to the same IMF and World Bank document, I want to remind this House that this was developed as a tool for countries to establish and maintain their legal and institutional frameworks. Now, these documents are available to serious people who intend on acting in the best interests of their country. Countries must assure the independence of the FIU from political influence, as well as independence from the competent or supervisory authority in deciding which transactions to analyze or what information to disseminate. What happens, Madam Speaker, if under the proposed amendment, a director of the SSA has to investigate a sitting Minister of National Security, whoever he or she may be? If that situation were to arise, we are left in the dark as to how this law would treat with that situation. As the World Bank noted, that the FIU should not be subject to abuse or undue influence from government authorities. Should this not also be the same for an agency like the SSA? Or would this not be part of the solution to our problems? Because checks and balances are essential, are fundamental to the preservation of democracy. When a government comes to and asks people to give them more power, they must come prepared to say how they intend to protect against the abuse of power. And that protection should not be because we should trust them. Because we all know that we cannot trust individuals. The same way they can bring an amendment expanding the powers of the SSA, they can also bring an amendment to protect the people. So, where did they look for this legislation? I don't know. Perhaps they did look to the Russian Federation. Because as a UK Guardian article noted on the 6th of October 2013, the FSB, which is similar to the SSA as proposed, the FSB, it is a successor to the KGB in Russia. It's much more than just an ordinary security service. Combining the function of an elite police force with those of a spy agency and wielding immense power, it has come a long way since the early 1990s. The director of the FSB is appointed and removed from office by the president of the Russian Federation and reports to the president and chairman of the Russian federal government. The article went on to talk about how they have used power, how that institute has used power to coerce the citizenry of the Russian Federation. There are a number of other reports of FSB abuses, like the CBC's Russia using high treason charge to root out perceived internal enemies. And I have the article here, and the article is by Susan Ormiston, CBC News, posted April 4, 2016. And the headline is Russia using high treason charge to root out perceived internal enemies. I say this to illustrate that once sufficient checks and balances are not in place, if it is the desire of the political directorate to create a Trinidad and Tobago FSB, what is to stop them? On these, the amendments are silent. And this is something we should be concerned about. I refer to a Newsday editorial of Tuesday, March 15, 2016. And I quote from the Newsday editorial. What is more troubling, however, is the failure of our Attorney General to outline any true measures which would act as inbuilt protections from abuse in the reconfigured intelligence gathering apparatus. Though assuring there would be due safeguards built into the system, they said here Alwari, I'd say the Honourable Member for St. Fernando West, Alwari failed to enumerate any specific provision, and none exist in the proposed legislation. It continues, nor did the Attorney General say whether judicial oversight, which occurs in relation to the Interception of Communications Act, would be expanded given the SSA's broader mandate, though he assured the warrant procedure would still apply. He's asking us, and the government is asking us, give us this power over this vast array of legislation. Give us this power and trust us that we will not abuse it. Well, Madam Speaker, I am scared. In Naparima, at the executive level, whenever we have private conversations, we go into what the Bajans call the pasture, and we have a one-on-one conversation because we are not sure that our conversations are being monitored. And this legislation allows our private conversations to be monitored. If we pass this legislation in its present form, Trinidad is headed down the slippery slope to Uganda and to the Russian Federation. So who did they talk to? What did they look at? Because when I look at legislation in the United States, the UK, Australia, and Canada, I could not find similar legislation. I did find some similarities with Uganda, where the 1987, what they call the Security Organizations Act, established what they call the ISO, that is the Internal Security Organization, and the ESO, the External Security Organization. And these two agencies are directed by the Director Generals, appointed by and accountable to the President of Uganda, and exist to collect intelligence and provide advice on Uganda's security directly to the President. There was a Forbes magazine article which listed the president of Uganda as one of the 10 worst dictators globally. Because right now, it appears that we are making laws based more on the Putin model and the Mussolini of Uganda model, rather than using the native intelligence that we have. He is the president of Uganda. I will give you an idea of what they do in other countries and what we should be doing. If you on the other side are serious, you'll take careful note. As the representatives of the citizens, parliamentarians have crucial oversight role, holding the executive and its agencies accountable. The Attorney General sought to comfort us about oversight. He said, and I quote the Attorney General, I have demonstrated that there's proportionality by having the executive power balanced by the Auditor General, his words, the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, by the judicial supervision of any interception of communication. And I have shown that it has been rooted in the issue of the management of the scourge of criminality associated with drugs. We must be comforted by the fact that the parliamentary oversight for this expanded agency is the Auditor General report to be considered by Parliament through the presentation of annual reports. This is what the Attorney General thinks the extent of oversight should be. You see, if you start placing the rights of the citizenry in the forefront, it is not difficult to come to the conclusion that more rather than less parliamentary oversight can only be good. And now I go to my friend, the member for Laventille West, and I will show in the United States the level of oversight they have over intelligence and agencies. In the United States, as a matter of fact, in their commitment to the ideals of democracy, have the Intelligence Oversight Act of 1980, an entire piece of legislation they have to govern their intelligence agencies. A federal law that requires the U.S. government agencies to report covert actions to the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, both houses, the Senate and the Congress. Madam Speaker, if you'd allow me, I'll quote from the bill. It says, this act requires the director of the CIA and heads of all federal entities involved in intelligence activities to keep the Congressional Intelligence Committees fully and currently informed of all intelligence activities, including any significant anticipated intelligence activity. So we're getting an Auditor General report that probably comes a couple of years late, and we are asked to exercise oversight in that regard. In the United States, the Congress has to be informed prior to any covert action, intelligence action. And he comes and he tells us that the United States, that they have the same situation as we have in Trinidad. It requires the director in the United States and the heads of federal entities to furnish information requested by the Select Committee on Intelligence and report in a timely fashion to such committees any illegal intelligence activity or significant intelligence failures. And it directs the President of the United States to fully inform the Select Committee in a timely fashion of intelligence operations in foreign countries. Where is this similar? Where's the similar checks and balances in Trinidad and Tobago and in this legislation? Why are we limiting ourselves? Is it not in the best interest of the citizenry to empower Parliament to allow for stringent oversight? Is this not better than simply presenting the Auditor General's report and saying, here, take it, cool it, be satisfied with that? But let's go to the United Kingdom. They have the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, which was established in October 2000. Specifically, it provides a right of redress for anyone, any citizen, who believes they have been the victim of unlawful action of the UK intelligence agencies or wider wider human rights infringements in breach of the Human Rights Act of 1998. Any citizen who feels that he's being wiretapped in the UK, he can appeal to the Investigatory Powers Tribunal to have redress for illegal encroachments. We do not have that in Trinidad. We have a director appointed, by the cabinet, by the Minister of National Security. We have someone who could be We have somebody who could be fired by the Minister of National Security, and that's it. Under this legislation, they can wiretap any of us here, any of us, and we will not know. It can go into a data bank, and we will not know. They tell us that they can destroy it at some point in time. But what happens between the point that they get it and they destroy it? How many people you have working in the SSA who can know our private business? This is frightening, this piece of legislation.
That's why it needs a GSC.
These are some of the countries. They speak to my central point that if you come asking for more power, be prepared to give us more accountability and be prepared to give us more transparency. It seems to me that one could say, Madam Speaker, that one could see the elements of a creeping dictatorship in this legislation. A creeping dictatorship. I do not know for sure if this is the case, but I do know that power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This phenomenon has been observed over time in different countries and different cultures, making it essentially a human characteristic. It is our greatest argument for the implementation of proper oversight. As we reflect on the power given to the SSA by way of the amendment, and by extension the powers given to the government, since we know that director shall be subject to the directions of the minister, should the amendments have provided for additional oversight mechanisms? Thomas Jefferson, in the Declaration of Independence, and you think about how could people in the United States, with all the benefit of gate and all the education that we have, come up with these ideas that make sense and transcend centuries? And we sit here today and create legislation that without a check, we have the University of the West Indies. We have people in this parliament who have been to Harvard. Yeah, Thomas Jefferson, in the Declaration of Independence, hundreds of years ago, 250 years, said, quote, that to secure these rights, the inalienable rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter and abolish it. And Madam Speaker, I come to a comment that I would like the Attorney General to reflect on, and those opposite to reflect. It was given at our own Declaration of Independence, and I quote from this gentleman who is iconic. He's
30 minutes have expired. You're entitled to 15 more minutes. Are you going to avail yourself of it? And therefore, before you stand, may I ask the concurrence of the House that we take the suspension at the end of the contribution of the Honourable Member for Naparima. Do I have your concurrence? Yes. Please proceed, sir.
Yeah. Madam Speaker, I'm quoting an iconic figure in our history and our constitutional development. This is what that person said. Quote, when future historians chronicle our achievements, it will be noted that the negotiations we spearheaded at Marlborough House constitute our greatest gift to the nation. The freedoms we have written into the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago constitute our greatest legacy to posterity. We were uncompromising over freedom of the press and the independence of the judiciary. We made sure that Trinidad and Tobago acknowledged the supremacy of God, hence a prayer by the Speaker before each session of Parliament. We made sure there would be no discrimination by reason of race, color, origin, religion, or sex. We wrote into the Constitution the individual rights to life, liberty, security of person, and enjoyment of property. We secured the individual's right to show affiliation to political party of choice and to express himself freely. He was speaking of our inalienable rights, the same rights Thomas Jefferson spoke of. He is saying that the inclusion of these rights would be their greatest gift to our nation. Madam Speaker, the Honorable Lionel Sukaran, former MP for Naparima, said that the freedoms written in the Constitution would be their greatest legacy. So, decades after, an MP from Naparima has to talk to the grandson of this iconic figure to talk about the urgent need to protect our liberties that are our inalienable rights given to us from God. What would be his legacy in the perpetual struggle between liberty and authority? What side would he fall on? We're just looking at the SSA Amendment Act. And if we cast our minds back to debate...
Speaker, may I ask? I would like to invoke Standing Order 4410, please.
Honourable Member for Naparima, please proceed.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Just looking at the SSA Amendment Bill, and if we cast our minds back to the debate on the Commissioner of Police, where he sought, and they sought, to put a mechanism in place where the Minister of National Security could trigger the appointment of a commissioner. It is clear that that side favors increasing state authority without any proportionate balancing of the protections of the rights of citizens. But it might not be what he wants to do. If you happen to watch the news on Wednesday, there was an interesting clip of our Prime Minister speaking at a political meeting in Malabar. He said he ordered a minister back to his ministry. Madam Speaker, we had our Prime Minister boasting about running a minister from the waterfront back to Richmond Street. So what we are seeing today might be just another manifestation of that. Madam Speaker, in looking at how countries get to amass power, how dictators, how governments seek to amass power, they do that by instilling fear in the citizenry. Last week in this House, the other side sought to invoke the fear of the IMF to make harsh measures and put forward more palatable ones to a fed-up population. Fear of a failing economy, fear of no money to live a comfortable life, and now fear of a rapidly escalating crime situation has brought us here today. A noted psychologist, a principal researcher at Microsoft, Ms. Boyd, Dana Boyd, in her article noted that fear is used to undermine and inform citizenry. You and I are asked to put aside our good sense and accept wholesale what our leaders are telling us because they present it as a solution to all our problems. This is not to say that it is not a well-accepted fact in Trinidad and Tobago right now that we have a serious crime situation. This does not change the fact that this responsible opposition is willing to work with the government to deliver a sensible and sustainable response to our crime problem. But we, as a population, must always be vigilant. We must always be discerning and think critically about the information that is presented to us. In Trinidad and Tobago right now, there has been a lot of appeal to our own sense of patriotism, seemingly to benefit the government. Patriotism does not mean give the government everything you want. They have made it difficult for our population to think critically about this Strategic Services Amendment Bill 2016 because it is presented as a panacea, as a savior. It is presented as the solution to the problem that we all want solved immediately. But at what cost? The opposition leader, Mrs. Kamla Persad-Bissessar, had to call on the Prime Minister to break the silence on crime last year. This was on November 3rd, 2015. The silence persisted, and we were asked just to relax. as the PM told students of the University of the Southern Caribbean that they were working on the crime situation, even if they appeared to be quiet on the issue. Suggestions that a constitutional majority should be required was scoffed at and dismissed as the government sought to convince our country that this is a simple amendment, just a few pages, no big deal, nothing to worry about. Trust us. This will solve our intelligence gathering problems. And once we have intelligence, it would lead to more detection. And then we have the Prime Minister, who you remember was leading a team of silent men at the time on crime before, speaking on April the 4th. Coincidentally, no doubt, when conversations about the power that this SSA bill is asking the population to put in the hands of the government. We are told that crime is a national crisis. Permit me to quote some of his words as he delivered the address to the PNM Special Convention, ironically themed Enriching Our Democracy. He said, "So for January, February, and March, the criminals have put away 122 of us." Note the fear that we are using crime to get us to suspend our critical thinking. It is for this reason that we are here today. Madam Speaker, we are looking at a situation where we on this side are prepared to support this legislation. We are we are prepared to support it. We are prepared to support it if it goes to the Joint Select Committee and it is refined to protect our fundamental rights and those of the average citizen of Trinidad and Tobago. When this debate on the SSA amendment started, a number of presentations to the government bench sought to convince us that these were simple amendments. That brevity was called equal simplicity, and therefore the population need not pay careful attention. But this amendment fundamentally deals with the relationship between the state and the population, the struggle between liberty and authority, and that is not so simple as they want us to believe. This amendment should not be reduced to crime is a problem, so give us more power to deal with it. We have no money, oil prices low, we pay more taxes. We have crime, a crime problem, give us more power, limit your privacy. What next, Madam Speaker? This is 7 months in, and where do we go from here? What will be our quality of life at the end of the year? We on this side have no problem with the government taking responsible steps in our fight against crime. But these things must be done in the interest of the people, and they must keep our fundamental rights and freedoms at the center. You want increased powers? Well, show us in detail how you plan to check against the abuses of that power, the potential abuses of that power. And for heaven's sake, don't tell me that the Auditor General's report will deal with that. Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley will save you from crime. Just give him expanded SSA powers to do it. He was already telling you he was the solution. Evidently, we should have paid more attention when they were telling us the Red Army was coming. We should have taken that as a threat to our rights and our freedoms. When they said we are in charge now, we should have taken that also as a threat. We should look at this SSA amendment as a warning that we might be very well witnessing a creeping PNM dictatorship. I thank you.
Honorable members, we now take the suspension. We shall be back in 30 minutes.